Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place most people never talk about, because frankly, it stinks. Literally. You're in a small brick house in the middle of Victorian London, standing just inside the threshold of someone's modest home, and already your eyes are watering. The air is thick with a cloying mix of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and something far worse, the unmistakable punch of human waste. Welcome to the world of 19th century bathrooms, where the dirtiest secrets aren't whispered behind closed doors. They're sitting right there in the corner of the room. You won't believe this, but in many homes, especially among the working class, the bathroom as we understand it simply doesn't exist. There's no tiled oasis, no running water, no flush handle to dramatically push. Instead, tucked discreetly under the bed or behind a screen, you'll find the household chamber pot, cold ceramic, wide-mouthed, and waiting patiently for its next customer. All right, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe, but only if your heart says yes. And if you're listening from somewhere across the world, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far the chamber pot community stretches. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. You tiptoe deeper into the house, careful not to touch anything. The floorboards creak. A thin curtain separates the main room from the sleeping area, but the smell slips through like a guilty secret. There's a faint herbal note in the air. Someone has sprinkled crushed lavender near the windowsill, probably hoping it would overpower the ever-present scent of waste and coal smoke. It doesn't work. Nothing works. Because beneath all the oil lamps and lace doilies, the real heart of a Victorian home beats with the quiet, ever-festering presence of filth. Every family has its own scent. You wouldn't think that was a compliment, but in the 1800s, it was how people navigated the intimate geography of home life. The Smiths might smell like boiled onions and wet wool. The Harrisons, like mildew, turpentine, and children who haven't bathed in days. You take shallow breaths as you explore the parlour where the family gathers. The carpet is stained from years of muddy boots and coal dust. The furniture is tired and sagging, but proudly arranged. Somewhere behind a curtain or in a cupboard is where the night soil goes, a delicate phrase for something far less delicate. The thing is, people didn't necessarily think this was odd. That's what makes it so remarkable. This was daily life. You visit a home like this in 1850, and nobody apologises for the smell because you smell too. Hygiene was relative. Soap was expensive. Hot water was a rare luxury. And even if you could afford a bath, who's to say it would make a difference? The coal soot settled again before you even finished drying off. You reach the back door, which leads to a narrow outdoor yard. This is where things get worse. The shared privy, a wooden shack with a wooden bench and a dark gaping hole, is technically the bathroom for the family and their neighbours. But it's often overflowing, and on rainy days, it floods. You peek inside. The floor is slick. The walls are scrawled with soot and possibly something worse. And the pit? You don't want to look. You really don't. The family keeps a tin of lime nearby to scatter over the waste, a poor man's deodorant. Some use ashes from the fireplace. Others burn sulphur or set out bowls of vinegar. There's even a trend lately, hanging sprigs of rue and rosemary near the entrance. Supposedly it purifies the air, but all it does is mask death with perfume. The miasma theory, the belief that diseases float in bad air, is everywhere now. So people start plugging every nostril-offending crevice with scents, herbs, and chemicals that don't clean anything, but do at least change the flavour of the foulness. The real kicker? The cleanest homes are often the most dangerous. Families who take pride in scrubbing their floors and wiping down the furniture sometimes ignore the unseen dangers. Shared towels that never fully dry, drinking water stored beside the coal bucket, milk left open on the windowsill near the privy door. You see, this isn't just a story about smell. It's about the invisible things that lived in every droplet, every rag, every touch. And if you're thinking you just hold your nose and carry on, don't forget, you haven't even reached the bedrooms yet. That's where the chamber pots live. You'll get to them soon enough. You climb the narrow staircase, each wooden step groaning beneath your weight. There's a faded runner nailed in place, worn bare in the middle by years of feet passing silently in the dark. Upstairs, everything feels closer. Lower ceilings, thick curtains drawn tight to keep in the warmth, though it also traps the scent of damp sheets and unwashed linen. You step into the bedroom. It's cold. The fireplace hasn't been lit in days, and frost climbs the inside of the window panes like lace. But your eyes are drawn to what's lurking beneath the bed. There it is, the chamber pot, a squat white jug with a handle, its lip faintly chipped, its insides no longer as white as the day it was made. It's been used in the night, probably by more than one person, and someone will have to carry it downstairs come morning. That someone is usually the maid, or the youngest daughter if there is no help. With practiced disgust, she'll take the pot out to the backyard, lift the heavy wooden lid on the communal cesspit and pour it in. And if the pit is full, then the waste sloshes over, seeping into the mud or worse, into the water well if you're unlucky enough to live downhill. In wealthier homes, servants carry chamber pots through narrow service staircases to a designated sluice room, where the contents are dumped and rinsed, if water is available. In poorer homes, you do it yourself, or not at all. Sometimes the pot sits under the bed for days. Sometimes it gets knocked over in the dark. Sometimes a guest doesn't even bother to aim properly. You lift the lid just a little and shut it quickly. Best not to dwell on it. But you're not done with the smells. On a nearby dresser, a bowl and pitcher wait for the morning wash. This too is part of the Victorian bathroom experience, only there is no bathroom. You pour the water from the pitcher into the bowl, dip a rag or sponge, and dab your face and underarms as best you can, teeth chattering in the cold. The water is icy. Heating it would require fetching coal, lighting the stove and waiting, too much effort for a morning wash. So, you learn to live with cold water and incomplete cleaning. Many people only wash their whole body once a week, some less. There's no drain, so when you're done, you toss the used water out the window or down the stairs, unless someone is walking below, which happens, often. A popular joke of the time goes, if you're walking past a tenement and hear someone shout "Gardez-lou," run. It's a warning cry, borrowed from the French "Gardez-l'eau," meaning watch out for the water. Except it's not just water, it's the entire contents of that bowl, and sometimes the chamber pot too. By now, your nose has gone numb to it all. Maybe that's the trick. Maybe that's how people lived with it. Not by solving it, but by slowly learning to forget what cleanliness really meant. If you grow up in a world where odours cling to your clothes, your hair, your very skin, maybe you stop noticing. Maybe you start to think that anyone who smells like soap is just showing off. Of course, some people go to great lengths to seem clean. You peek inside a little wardrobe and find a bottle of rosewater and a tin of talcum powder. These are not for true cleanliness, but for illusion. A pat of powder under the arms, a dab of scent behind the ears, and you're fresh enough to appear in public. People judged each other by how well they masked their filth, not how well they removed it. But not all odours could be hidden. Some were stronger than lavender, stronger than talc, stronger even than vinegar or carbolic acid. And you're about to follow one of them downstairs, back through the house, and out into the street, where the problem becomes far bigger than one family. Because out there, under the cobblestones and behind the brick walls, something is festering, something that smells even worse than the chamber pot. And unlike the pot, you can't put a lid on it. You step outside just as the morning air starts to shift. It's early, but the streets are already stirring. Horse hooves clatter on stone, carts creak under sacks of coal or cabbages, and someone shouts at a dog to get out of the way. A grocer's boy is opening shutters down the block, and a woman with a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders hurries past, empty chamber pot in hand, keeping her eyes fixed ahead. No one stares, no one flinches. Everyone knows exactly what's in that pot, and everyone has their own waiting to be dealt with. You tighten your scarf and fall into step behind her. The city has a rhythm, even in filth. Across the alleyway, you catch sight of another housemaid in a muddy apron struggling to balance two chamber pots against her chest as she unlatches the garden gate. She glances around just for a second, and then tosses the contents behind a low wooden fence. It splashes onto a pile that's already been building for days. If the night soil men don't come soon, it will start to seep into the neighbour's yard. Again. In theory, there's a system. The night soil men are supposed to come through every few days with carts and shovels, emptying the cesspits before they overflow. In practice, they're often late, drunk or bribed to skip poorer neighbourhoods altogether, and when they do come, it's with slow clanking wheels and the thick stench of months-old human waste, scooped up by lantern light, slopped into barrels and carted away to the edge of town. Sometimes it's buried, sometimes it's dumped into rivers, and sometimes, with shocking efficiency, it's sold to farmers as fertiliser. The word night soil sounds quaint until you see it moving down the street in a leaking cart. You duck as a window above creaks open. Someone pours out their morning wash water. It splashes just feet away from where you're walking. It's not just water, though. The cloudy liquid carries traces of ash, spit and soap if you're lucky, or worse if you're not. Streets like this have open gutters, called kennels, running alongside the pavement. They're meant to carry off rainwater and waste, but they clog constantly. One look at the thick ooze inching past your boots, and you know, this isn't just mud. What's shocking isn't the waste, it's the normalcy of it all. Children skip over puddles without a second thought. Men in top hats step carefully between manure piles. Women lift the hems of their skirts to avoid the worst of the slime. And all the while, chamber pots are being emptied, wash basins are being dumped, and kitchen scraps are tossed into the same streets where people walk, work, and sometimes eat. The smells are layered. There's the sourness of old milk, the bitter bite of coal smoke, the ammonia tang of urine baking in the sun. You pass a butcher's shop where blood has pooled just beyond the curb. A rat scurries from a drain, its fur slick with something unidentifiable. You can't tell whether you're hungry or nauseous, maybe both. You stop in front of a boarding house and notice a pile of chamber pots stacked beside the door. Not cleaned, just waiting. You peer through the open doorway. A girl no older than 12 emerges with another pot, carefully shielding it with both hands as she hurries down the steps. Her face is blank, not embarrassed, not angry, just resigned. She doesn't see this as punishment, it's simply part of the morning, and that's what stings the most. The casual acceptance. The way everyone around you has found a way to live with filth, not because they want to, but because there's no alternative. Pipes are still rare. Water closets are a luxury. And even when those inventions exist, they don't fix the deeper issue. The city itself is drowning in its own waste, and no one knows how to dig it out. The deeper you walk into the city, the clearer it becomes that waste isn't hidden in Victorian life. It's woven into the landscape. Beneath your boots, beneath the cobbles, beneath the foundation stones of houses and schools and factories, lies a labyrinth of cesspits. Some are properly built with brick linings and wooden lids, but most are crude holes in the earth, dug once and forgotten. When they fill up, people simply dig another, or let the old one overflow. You pass a row of houses with stained foundations. The bottom bricks are discoloured from years of seepage. In the summer, the stink is unbearable. In winter, it freezes into a strange, crunchy crust. One boy tells you, half laughing, half proud, that he can tell the health of a family by the smell of their privy. Sweet means fever. Bitter means worms. If it don't smell at all, someone's dead. He isn't joking. Some families have made innovations, if you can call them that. One home along the edge of the alley has rigged a system of slanted boards leading from their upstairs window to a small trench. Every morning they tip the pot, and gravity does the rest. It's not elegant, but it means fewer trips downstairs. It also means the trench, meant for rainwater, now runs milky brown every dawn. No one complains. They just step over it and hope for dry shoes. You duck into a small shop, more of a shack really, where a woman is selling bundles of sage and dried lavender. She wraps the herbs in thin paper and ties them with frayed string. For the privy, she says flatly, before you even ask. Or to pin in the armpits, or to burn. You buy one out of pity and notice the crushed petals smell oddly like wet straw. She shrugs. It won't fix anything, love, but it'll make you forget it for a moment. Back in the street, you watch a man in a tall hat pull his daughter aside. A cart has tipped, and its contents, a full load of night soil, are now spreading across the road in slow, bubbling waves. The man ties a handkerchief around his face. The girl retches into her sleeve. Even the horses back away, hooves slipping on the wet stone. A crowd gathers, not to help, but to marvel. This happens often enough that no one panics. Some men laugh. A constable pokes at the sludge with a stick. A local boy takes bets on how far it will reach. It's a spectacle, yes, but also a symptom. The city is breaking under its own weight. Every household chamber pot, every backyard cesspit, every neglected drain adds to a growing tidal wave of waste, and everyone knows it. You follow a narrow lane behind a row of townhouses. Here, a brick wall shields a private garden. The gate creaks open, revealing an elegant bench, climbing roses, and, at the far end, a wooden outhouse painted green. It's clean, it's quiet, it smells faintly of lye. This, you realise, is the upper-class solution. Same bodily functions, different packaging. The waste still goes somewhere, it just goes out of sight. And that, more than anything, is the luxury. Not cleanliness, but distance from the mess. But even that's an illusion, because in just a few years, even the prettiest gardens won't be able to hide what's happening below. The city's pipes are backing up. The River Thames is about to turn yellow and bubble in the sun. And all these secrets, once hidden in pots and trenches and fancy outhouses, are about to spill into the open for good. As you turn the corner and head back toward the heart of town, you pass a painted sign on the wall. Cleanliness is next to godliness. It's flaking, covered in soot, and just beneath it, a pile of rags soaked in something unspeakable. The sun is barely up, and already the parlour is stirring. You hear the rattle of teacups, the shuffle of slippered feet, and the rustle of corset strings being pulled tight. It's time for you to learn what toileting like a Victorian lady actually means. And it starts with discomfort, inconvenience, and a shocking amount of silence. You're seated in a modest bedroom, watching a woman begin her morning routine. She's middle class, which means she's got a little privacy, a basin with water from the maid, and a brass bedpan tucked discreetly behind a screen. She's been taught from birth to never speak of those functions. Her mother used euphemisms like making one's toilette or freshening up. Even the chamber pot was sometimes called a convenience. But make no mistake, this refined lady, now daintily powdering her face, had to use it during the night just like everyone else. You watch her stand carefully, lift the layers of her nightgown, petticoat, chemise and drawers, though not all drawers are created equal. Many were crotchless by design, because getting fully undressed every time you needed to go was absurd. She positions herself over the pot without sitting fully, hovering just above it, knees bent, balancing delicately like a trained performer. There's no flushing, no privacy fan, no noise to mask what happens next. And in a house with thin walls and creaky floors, everyone hears everything. This is where etiquette becomes survival. Women learn how to cough at the right moment, how to disguise the sound of relief with a rustle of skirts or a clink of the pitcher. Some even plan their visits for when the coal scuttle is being filled, or the church bell tolls down the street. Discretion wasn't just ladylike, it was expected. A woman who made her bodily needs known risked being seen as vulgar, or worse, untrained. In public, the challenge was even greater. Very few public toilets were designed with women in mind. Most were for men, stone urinals in alleyways, or rough wooden enclosures that offered little more than a visual shield. For women, it was often a choice between holding it dangerously long or using a filthy backroom privy shared with strangers. The wealthiest ladies could duck into a department store or tea room, where a powder room might offer a tiny semblance of comfort. But even then, the facilities were rudimentary at best. And what if you had to go while out visiting someone's home? Well, that was a game of quiet observation. If you stayed overnight, you might be shown to a guest room with a fresh basin and pot. But if it was just an afternoon call, you had to wait for the host to give a vague cue. Do let me show you the sitting room upstairs. Or, would you care to freshen up before tea? These were code, and if you missed it, you'd better hold it and hope you were leaving soon. The real ordeal came during travel. On long train journeys or stagecoach rides, women carried urinettes, small portable devices shaped like flasks made of tin or ceramic, which allowed some measure of relief in privacy, provided you had an enormous skirt and the balancing skills of a circus acrobat. Some models were lined with absorbent wool, others had to be emptied discreetly into bushes, out windows, or into unfortunate ditches beside the road. You're starting to realise that for Victorian women, toileting wasn't just a private moment, it was a logistical operation, a daily dance of concealment, balance, and ingenuity. And it all took place beneath corsets that compressed organs, narrowed bladders, and made urgency feel 10 times worse. But believe it or not, this wasn't the most stressful part of their hygiene routine. That comes later, when they try to keep their bodies clean, in ways society demands, with almost no tools and even less knowledge. You'll get there soon enough. For now, you're still hovering, knees shaking, over a cold porcelain pot, trying not to make a sound. Later that morning, you find yourself inside the dressing room of a much wealthier woman. She's older, stern, and dressed in layers so elaborate they look like upholstery. But don't be fooled! She too answers nature's call just like everyone else. The only difference? She doesn't do it alone. Her lady's maid kneels on a padded stool, brushing out her hair, while the mistress sits primly on a small wooden chair with an odd cutout beneath the cushion. It's called a commode chair, an elegant disguise for a chamber pot hidden inside a piece of furniture. No one speaks of what's happening. They simply proceed with the morning routine as if nothing is unusual. The hairbrush moves. The room remains fragrant with rosewater, and underneath her skirt the lady relieves herself with all the dignity she can muster. If you weren't watching closely, you might miss it. Privacy, in this world, isn't about being alone. It's about never acknowledging what the body does. The maid knows not to glance, not to react, not to pause the brushstroke. This isn't kindness, it's protocol. Servants were trained to pretend bodily functions didn't exist. A poorly timed sigh or shift of the eyes could get you dismissed, or worse, labelled indelicate. But things weren't always so restrained. Among the bohemian elite, actresses, writers, political radicals, there were whispers of rebellion. You overhear a young woman at a salon mention her refusal to use the chamber pot at all. "I rise early," she says with a sly smile, and walk straight into the garden. Her friends giggle. One admits she is taken to using the men's public lavatory, wearing a cloak to cover her skirts. Scandalous, certainly. But it's also freedom, from the corset, from the hovering, from the rituals of restraint that define the rest of her day. Back in more conservative circles, the rituals grow even stranger. Some women carry scent vials, not just to dab on the wrist, but to hold beneath the nose when entering a privy. Others line their chamber pots with lavender sachets or drops of camphor. The goal is never hygiene, it's control. Control over the smell, over perception, over what parts of being human are allowed to show. You step outside again, just for a moment, needing fresh air. But the illusion of cleanliness evaporates the moment you round the corner and find a chambermaid elbow deep in soapy water, scrubbing out 5 pots in a row. Her hands are red and raw. One of the pots cracks in her grip and she curses under her breath. "No one ever tells you what comes after the ball gowns," she mutters, "just how much bloody porcelain you'll be carrying by dawn." And it's true. The further you go into the world of Victorian toileting, the more invisible labour you find. Every woman who hovers over a dainty pot depends on another woman to carry it, scrub it, bleach it, and return it like new. Cleanliness here isn't magic. It's sweat and chapped knuckles and cold buckets at 5 a.m. You begin to understand that toileting like a lady is less about elegance and more about endurance. It means performing restraint even when your stomach aches. It means smelling like violets while crouching over cold porcelain. It means pretending none of it ever happened, even when someone else has to clean it up. And just when you think you've seen the worst of it, you remember what waits in the houses that aren't this lucky. Where there is no maid, no camphor, no indoor screen. Where the pot is used in front of children, scrubbed beside the dinner fire and stored openly because there's nowhere else to put it. You're starting to see why people feared illness not just as disease, but as exposure, as failure, as proof that all those perfumes and petticoats were nothing but a veil stretched tight over the messy truth of the human body. And that veil, it's already beginning to slip. The first time you hear someone proudly mention their water closet, you imagine something elegant, a small sanctuary perhaps, tucked behind a frosted glass door, with polished brass fittings and a marble floor. Then you actually see one, and smell it. And suddenly the term feels like a very generous lie. You're in a middle-class home, one of the few lucky enough to afford this modern marvel, an indoor flushing toilet. It's tucked into a tiny chilly room near the back of the house, just big enough to turn around in. The walls are bare plaster, the ceiling stained with damp, and the pull chain dangles from an overhead cistern that groans like an old man every time it's used. You step inside. The air is thick. The smell of damp wood, rust, and something far more human lingers, even though someone's just sprinkled carbolic powder around the floor. You look down, and there it is. A wooden seat with a circular hole cut in the middle, set atop a dark, sloshing bowl. A pipe leads down, though it doesn't go far. Because what lies beneath this house is not a true sewer. Not yet, but a cesspit. The flush sends waste just a few feet away, sometimes into a small brick-lined tank, sometimes straight into a pipe that empties into a nearby ditch or open drain. And when those fill up or clog, which they often do, the waste comes right back up, into the bowl, onto the floor, into the house. The first indoor flush toilets appeared in wealthier homes in the early 1800s, but adoption was slow. Not because people didn't want them, because they didn't work well. Many households used a valve closet or pan closet, which involved a complicated metal basin and a leather flap that was supposed to seal odours. It rarely did. Worse still, some homes had straight pipes, with no traps to block gas. That meant every foul scent from the cesspit below came drifting back into the home, funneled upward by the very pipe that was meant to carry it away. You try the chain. There's a delay, a gurgling sound, then a splash. It's underwhelming. The water dribbles, swirls half-heartedly and leaves behind evidence. A maid will have to come in with a bucket later, just to finish the job the toilet couldn't do. You imagine trying to impress a guest with this. Yes, madam. We have the latest in sanitation technology. Do mind the smell and the puddle. And here's the worst part. These water closets were expensive to install, costly to maintain, and still didn't solve the city's deeper sewage issues. In many neighbourhoods, adding one toilet simply meant adding another source of overflow to the already struggling cesspools under the streets. Some engineers warned against widespread installation, arguing that without proper underground drainage, indoor flush toilets would only accelerate the health crisis. They were right. The people who lived with them knew it too. One homeowner proudly shows you his thunderbox, a tall wooden box with a padded seat and a water jug nearby. He doesn't trust the flush, says it makes too much noise and not enough difference. His wife insists on burning sulphur candles after every use. The maid won't clean it without gloves soaked in vinegar. They all agree it's better than the chamber pot, but only just. You notice something odd in the corner of the room. A small canister of crushed charcoal. It's meant to absorb odours. Above it, someone's nailed sprigs of dried rosemary to the wall. And in the corner sits a bucket. Not for cleaning, but for emergencies. Because when the water closet backs up, they need a backup. You step out, blinking into the hallway light. The idea of the flush toilet feels less like progress now and more like a gamble. Sometimes it works, sometimes it floods, and sometimes it explodes. Yes, explodes. But we'll get to that. You don't believe it until you hear the story from 3 different households on the same block. It always starts the same way. A sudden gurgle, a strange bubbling noise, and then, boom, a geyser of filth erupting from the bowl, spewing its foul contents up the wall, across the floor, even onto the ceiling in some cases. It's called a blowback, and it's not rare. In homes with poorly ventilated or improperly sloped sewage pipes, pressure builds, and when that pressure finally finds an exit, it doesn't care who's sitting on the throne. One woman down the street swears she lost her hat that way. Another claims her cat won't go near the bathroom ever since. You laugh, until you remember the smell still clinging to your shoes from that last visit. Victorian plumbing was a patchwork of guesswork and ambition. The idea was sound. Create a sanitary, odour-free method of waste disposal that could be installed indoors. The reality? Leaking joints, corroded pipes, and gas seeping up from under the streets. Some homes tried to outsmart the problem with water traps. Little curves in the pipe meant to hold water and block smells. But if the trap dried out, which happened often, it was useless. Others tried backflow preventers, but those too were prone to failure. It wasn't uncommon for homes to seal off their toilets entirely during warm weather, using them only in winter when the ground froze and the smell seemed a little less alive. You're invited into one townhouse that prides itself on its modern conveniences. The lady of the house beams as she shows you her rosewood-panelled toilet room. The floor is tiled in a Moorish pattern. The brass fittings gleam. And yet, the scent is unmistakable. Not strong, but insistent, like something lurking behind a curtain. She offers you a spritz from a cut-glass bottle labelled eau de cologne, which only makes it worse. The perfume doesn't cover the smell. It just adds a new layer, as if to say, we've done our best. Please pretend along with us. You can't help but notice the windows are all nailed slightly open, even in December. Helps the vapours escape, she says. Vapours, that's the polite word. Everyone knows what she means. And yet, for all its flaws, the water closet becomes a symbol of status. Homes advertise it like a piano or a gas lamp. There are entire columns in ladies' journals devoted to choosing the right seat cover, or which ceramic pattern flatters which wallpaper. Some even host toilette teas, where ladies gossip in the adjacent room while taking turns inspecting the plumbing marvel next door. Not using it, of course, just admiring. But most homes aren't like this. Most homes don't have gas lamps or parlours, much less tiled flush rooms. They have chamber pots, or worse, communal yards with holes in the ground and planks laid across. For them, the idea of a flushing indoor toilet feels like something from a fantasy novel. And in truth, it's not until the final decades of the 19th century that flush toilets begin to truly function as advertised. And even then, only in homes connected to a working sewer line. Which brings you to the final, lingering irony. For many Victorians, the toilet was more dangerous than the waste it was supposed to remove. It invited gases into the home. It sprayed contents unpredictably. It fooled people into thinking the problem was gone, when it had merely been pushed underground, waiting to bubble up in the next warm season. And as you wipe your shoes on the doormat and step back into the fresh air, you begin to understand. The water closet wasn't a solution. It was a performance. A porcelain mask over a problem that still seeped up through the cracks, no matter how lovely the fittings or how fragrant the rosewater. You're walking along Broad Street, boots slick with the morning's muck, when you hear a sound you'll come to dread. A low, wet belch from beneath the pavement. You pause. The ground doesn't move, but the air changes. Warmer, wetter, wrong. A sickly sweet rot wafts up from a nearby grate, and for a moment, you wonder if something has died down there. You're close, because beneath your feet the city is rotting from the inside out. It's not just chamber pots and water closets anymore. This part of London, like others slowly catching on, has begun connecting homes to the public sewer system. In theory, this should help. In practice, the city's Victorian sewage infrastructure is a hastily stitched Frankenstein of old brick tunnels, misaligned pipes, and engineering guesswork. You duck into an alley where an iron manhole cover sits slightly askew. Steam curls from the edges. You lift it. Just a peek. A narrow shaft of light reveals a dark tunnel running below the street, the brickwork blackened with years of grime. The smell hits you instantly, an overwhelming slap of sulfur, methane, and decay. Somewhere down there, liquid filth is meant to be flowing out toward the Thames, but today it's barely moving. These combined sewers carry everything: human waste, rainwater, dead rats, offal from butchers' shops, blood from slaughterhouses, and even the refuse from tanneries and dye works. And when it rains, the whole system floods, manholes erupt, toilets gurgle in protest, and the streets, already filthy, become rivers of stinking runoff. You follow the path downhill, noticing how the houses worsen as the slope steepens. That's no accident. Poorer neighbourhoods were built on the city's lower ground where runoff accumulates. The rich live uphill, flushing their problems downhill, where they gather like shame at the bottom of a glass. A shopkeeper stands outside with a broom, futilely sweeping sewage away from her doorstep. "Third time this week," she mutters, pushing black water toward the gutter. Nothing to do but pray it dries. She means that literally. Some people burn incense, others hang holy medals above the sink. A few rub carbolic soap on the soles of their shoes before leaving the house, believing it wards off disease. Desperation breeds rituals, but it's not just inconvenience anymore, it's danger, because people are beginning to die. You hear whispers at the butcher's stall, hushed voices talking about sudden illness, diarrhea that turns to fever, a child gone overnight. Bad air, someone says. The stench carries sickness. The theory is everywhere. Miasma, the belief that disease spreads through noxious vapours. To them, the smell is the danger. It's why people stuff handkerchiefs with herbs, burn tar in the streets, and sprinkle their thresholds with lime. They believe if they can keep the stink out, they can keep death out. But you, standing now at the edge of a sewer vent, know better. Because just days from now, the water pump at the corner of this very street will be identified as the true killer. And a man named Dr. John Snow, no, not that one, will prove that it wasn't the air that spread disease. It was the water, contaminated, drawn from a well just a few feet from an overflowing cesspit, the same water people drank, washed with, cooked with, the same water babies teethed on. And yet, it still takes years for anyone to listen. You move on, boots heavier with every step. The bubbling beneath the city grows louder now, not because the sewer is working, but because it's about to fail. Entire sections of pipe collapse under the weight of their own filth. In some parts of the city, raw waste flows openly in the streets for days before anyone reports it. By then, it's soaked into everything: cellars, basements, cisterns, even into the bricks themselves. You pass a boy carrying buckets of water to a home at the end of the lane. "Is it from the pump?" you ask. He nods. You look back toward Broad Street, toward that quiet, ticking time bomb beneath the flagstones. And you wonder, how long before it happens again? The warning signs have been there for years, but London refuses to see them. Politicians argue over cost. Architects squabble over pipe gradients. Householders keep pouring waste into the same drains, praying their little piece of the problem doesn't back up. But underneath, the pressure is building, not just metaphorically, but quite literally. You find yourself at the river's edge now, watching as thick, sluggish water drags a film of yellowish foam along its surface. The Thames, once revered, now stinks so profoundly that people hold handkerchiefs to their faces when crossing bridges. Windows facing the river are kept tightly shut, even on the hottest days. Barges transporting goods sail faster through the worst stretches, crews gagging at the stink. Queen Victoria herself once tried to enjoy a boat trip along the water and was forced to retreat after only a few minutes, her face pale and covered in scented handkerchiefs. They called it the Great Stink, the summer of 1858, when the Thames turned from nuisance to national crisis. Temperatures soared, water levels dropped, and the river, already heavy with the waste of nearly 3 million people, began to bake. Newspapers described the scene in vivid horror. Bloated animal carcasses drifting downstream, slime coating the embankments, and clouds of flies buzzing in ecstasy over open drains. Clerks at the House of Commons doused curtains in chloride of lime just to endure sessions. And still, for weeks, nothing was done. It wasn't until politicians themselves could no longer bear the stench that real change began. And you're standing now in the very spot where a quiet hero begins to sketch out his revenge against the city's filth. Joseph Bazalgette, the civil engineer no one remembers until the pipes stop working. He believed the problem wasn't just filth, it was design. And so, while the city gagged and floundered, he began building a new vision, one of brick-lined intercepting sewers, carved beneath the very bones of London. He studied slope, velocity, diameter. He accounted for population growth generations ahead, and then, with thousands of workers, he began to dig. But this is still before all that. You're walking through the years where the pipes haven't been laid, the money hasn't been spent, and the people are still afraid to look directly at the truth. They burn incense. They lace their clothing with vinegar. They even blame immigrants, sin, or ghosts before daring to consider their own habits. Pouring night soil into the gutter like it's always been done, trusting that the city will somehow survive. You peek into one home where a family has tried to outwit the smell with innovation. A wooden pipe leads from their water closet straight into a bucket of ashes, which they empty daily. Keeps the smell down, the man tells you proud. Dry it out faster. It's a halfway solution. Not effective, but earnest. And that's what you see everywhere. People trying, with limited means and bad information, to be clean. You step through another alley and find a doctor hunched beside a barrel, examining the water with a crude lens. Too many deaths on this street, he says, mostly to himself. It's not the air, it's the source. He looks up, tired. But try telling the Board of Health that. His name is unfamiliar now, but years from now he'll be quoted in journals, his maps will be taught in schools, and this very water sample, drawn from a barrel beneath a leaking drain, will change public health forever. You climb the street as the light begins to fade, and you realise something startling. It's not the dirt itself that's most dangerous. It's the illusion of safety, the clean painted doorsteps, the polite euphemisms, the lavender in the corner, the porcelain lid on the chamber pot. They all whisper the same lie. It's under control, but you've seen beneath the lid now, and you know better. You find yourself standing at the edge of a bustling city park, surrounded by trees struggling to stay green, and benches that look more like public declarations of grime than invitations to rest. Behind you, a squat brick building hums with low activity. Its sign is barely visible, chipped away by years of soot and rainfall. This is what passes for a public lavatory, a rare and strange beast in Victorian London, and today you're going inside. You push open the heavy door and the first thing that hits you isn't the smell, it's the dark. The window is a narrow slit high above, offering little light and even less air. Your eyes adjust slowly, revealing a series of cubicles lined up like confessionals, each one with a heavy wooden door chipped around the handle. You take cautious steps forward. The stone floor is wet, whether from rainwater or something less savoury, you can't quite tell. This lavatory is pay-per-use. A penny gets you access to a cubicle with a bench-style toilet, a bit of privacy, and sometimes, if you're lucky, a scrap of newspaper nailed to the wall. The attendants, when they're around, keep a mop and a bucket of carbolic solution on standby. But they're underpaid and overworked, and the mop itself smells worse than the floor it's meant to clean. You slip into a stall. The door creaks. There's no latch. You hold it shut with your foot and take in the surroundings. The seat is stone cold, chipped, and slightly slanted to let things slide. A small slit in the wall allows for drainage, when the drain isn't clogged. And the graffiti? Let's just say Victorian gentlemen had much to say about politics, women, and digestion. Outside you hear a cough. Two men argue over who paid last time. Another tries the door and jiggles the handle. Privacy here is a privilege, not a guarantee. And yet, compared to the alternatives, this is paradise. Because before these public lavatories were built in the 1850s and 60s, relief in public meant ducking behind alleyways, stairwells, or whatever shadowed nook you could find. Men had it easier. Street urinals known as Vespasiens became common in Paris and were later imitated in London as pissoirs, often made of cast iron with ornate shielding but wide gaps at the base. From the knees down you could see everything, including the puddle forming around their boots. For women, the options were far worse. Many carried portable urinals disguised in handbags or hat boxes. Some simply waited until they returned home, no matter how uncomfortable or dangerous that became. Street modesty was enforced not just by social rules but by the sheer lack of accommodation. It wasn't just a public inconvenience, it was a public shaming. You exit the lavatory and watch as a man carefully counts out his pennies before stepping in. Others hesitate. Some can't afford the fee, so they find their own way. A side street, a patch of wall, a drain already flowing with yesterday's rain and everyone else's secrets. And the city, for all its stiff collars and Sunday sermons, pretends not to notice. You turn down another street and discover a scandal brewing outside a row of shops. Someone, perhaps a child, perhaps an adult, has relieved themselves just outside a bakery's back door. The shopkeeper is furious, shouting into the alley as if shame can undo the deed. Passers-by either sneer or shrug. No one offers a solution, because there isn't one. Not for the poor, not yet. And it's not just about having a toilet. It's about who gets to use it, when, and how. Because even among the public lavatories there's a hierarchy, and you're about to climb it. You follow the cobbled path toward the wealthier part of the city, where the bricks are cleaner, the windows larger, and the bathrooms, well, they're still terrible, but in a more respectable way. At the edge of a busy thoroughfare, you spot a newly built facility with painted signage, proper ventilation slats, and a polished brass plaque outside that reads, Gentleman's Lavatory, Public Convenience. It costs more than a penny, 2, to be exact, but what you get in return is space, quiet, and the illusion of respectability. Inside, the lighting is better, the marble floor drier. The urinals are separate, backed with tiling imported from Belgium. A uniformed attendant nods politely as you pass. There's even a small wash basin with a trickle of cold water and a brittle towel hanging from a brass hook. Though if you knew how many hands had used that towel before you, you might reconsider touching it. This is where the better class of Victorian gentleman goes when he's out in public. Politicians, clerks, doctors, their boots shine, their collars are stiff, and yet, the moment they enter these stalls, they're bound by the same awkward crouch, the same anxious glances, the same grimace at the cold porcelain that greets them inside. Here, the filth is polished, but it lingers. You overhear 2 men complaining about the stench, something about the new materials being worse than the old wood. One mutters about how he misses the thunderbox at the club. You want to laugh, or cry. Even surrounded by marble, they're still chasing dignity in a room built for something no one wants to talk about. In another corner of the city, you find a women's lavatory that's newer still, an attempt at modern sanitary design. It's modest but intentionally elegant. Pink tile, small flowers painted on the walls, even a powder mirror that has seen better days. But what really catches your attention is the queue. It stretches around the block. Because while the city has begrudgingly acknowledged that men need to relieve themselves in public, it has barely begun to admit that women do too. There are far fewer facilities for women, and they're smaller, more expensive, and far less maintained. Some neighbourhoods don't have any at all, so women wait, or they hold it, or they go home, and if they can't, they risk shame, humiliation, a stain on their skirts and their reputation. A sign tacked outside the facility reads, "Closed on Sundays." Someone has scrawled underneath in charcoal, "What do women do on the Lord's Day?" You walk away, shoes scraping against the stone, and it strikes you how often the question of sanitation becomes a question of who gets to be clean in public, who has the money, who has the time, who has the permission. In the outer boroughs, makeshift arrangements still dominate. Families in tenements build lean-to privies in their shared yards, often just a wooden plank over a trench. A simple curtain provides privacy, if it hasn't been torn down or stolen. Rain turns the dirt into sludge. Summer turns the air into a wall. You pass a group of children playing with sticks, drawing in the mud near one of these yards. A little girl picks up something and holds it close before an older sibling swats it from her hand. You don't want to know what it was. You just hope she washes before supper. The public toilet, you realise, is more than a convenience. It's a mirror. It reflects every crack in the city's sense of order, every inequality, every blind spot. It shows you who matters and who doesn't, who gets a lock, who gets a light, who gets to disappear behind a door without judgment. And tomorrow morning, the man who polishes the brass plaque will arrive again with his rag and his smile, ready to keep the illusion gleaming for those who can afford it. It's Saturday afternoon, and the kettle is already whistling in the corner. You're in a 2-room flat above a grocer's shop, where 7 people share a single space, a single stove, and a single battered copper washtub. And today, it's time for the weekly ritual known simply as bath night. The eldest daughter is already peeling potatoes in the kitchen, elbow to elbow with her younger brother, who's scrubbing the inside of the tub with sand and vinegar. They take turns heating water on the stove, bucket after bucket, because there's no running hot water in the building. No indoor plumbing, just a tap in the courtyard that trickles cold, hard water for 5 neighbouring families to fight over. You help carry the first steaming pail to the centre of the room. The tub is now 3 inches deep, enough to sit in if you curl your knees up to your chest. A curtain is drawn across the room, not for modesty, but to keep the heat in. Privacy doesn't exist here. Neither does luxury. The father goes first. It's his right, as the breadwinner. He lowers himself into the water with a grunt, reaching for the bar of yellow soap that's been shaved down to a crescent. He washes quickly, face, pits, feet. No time to linger. No point either. The water's already clouding, collecting the week's worth of sweat and coal dust from the back of his neck. Next comes the youngest child, then the second youngest, then the mother. By the time the 5th person slides in, the water has gone grey, with a faint slick of something oily riding the surface. But no one complains. This is how it's done. You try not to stare, but it's impossible not to notice the careful choreography, the way they look away when someone undresses, the way the mother hums softly while scrubbing behind the ears of her youngest, the way no one says out loud what they all think. This is disgusting, but it's better than nothing, because the alternative is worse. The poor often go weeks without bathing. There are entire neighbourhoods where washtubs don't exist, where children are rinsed in buckets and adults simply wipe down with damp cloths. Water costs money, soap costs money, firewood to heat it costs money. And even when they can scrape together enough, the effort it takes, the time, the hauling, the cooling drafts from ill-sealed windows, feels insurmountable, especially in winter. You glance at the soap again. It's homemade, lye mixed with leftover fat from the butcher's stall. It smells faintly of ash and something else, perhaps onions. Soap from the shop is milled, scented, wrapped in paper. The kind they use here comes in chunks, stored in a drawer with potatoes and onions to keep the rats from nibbling it. As the next person lowers themselves into the bath, you hear the floor creak. It's damp underneath from repeated spillover. Mould climbs the baseboards in dark green fingers. The family knows this. They try to dry the floor after every bath night, but sometimes it's too late. The rot is already setting in. And yet, there's laughter. Someone tells a joke. A child flicks water at his sister and gets a slap on the arm. The mother chuckles under her breath. Because in this tiny, grimy, steamy space, something else lives alongside the dirt. A sense of routine, of shared hardship, of closeness that isn't always pleasant, but is always present. You wonder what it would feel like to bathe alone, in clean water, in a private room, with a lock on the door and a fresh towel that didn't smell faintly of last week's soup. But here, bath night is as much about adaptation as it is about hygiene. You scrub, you rinse, you step out. The next person steps in. You wring out your hair and towel off in the same air where dinner is cooking. You get clean, sort of. And tomorrow, it starts again. Later that evening, the tub is still warm, barely. The water, once steaming, has turned a cloudy grey tinged with bits of coal dust and stray hairs. But there's one more person who needs to bathe. The servant. She's waited all day, quietly keeping the fire going, hauling water, helping scrub backs, emptying the tin bucket that catches the runoff. Now, at nearly midnight, she peels off her damp apron and closes the parlour door behind her. It's her turn. There's no audience now, no humming or potato peeling, just silence. She dips one foot into the water and flinches. It's not cold exactly, but it's heavy, used. You can't help but wonder if this counts as cleansing, or if it's just a ritualized redistribution of filth. But she doesn't pause long. She knows better than to linger. The floorboards beneath her are warped and soft from years of soaking. The fire is nearly out. The last candle flickers. She scrubs quickly. Shoulders, elbows, calves. She doesn't use much soap. What remains is too precious, and not hers. Instead, she rubs with a coarse flannel, chasing the grime of a 14-hour workday off her skin. Her hands are red and cracked. There's no towel left, so she dries with the edge of her uniform petticoat, which will be rinsed and worn again in the morning. Outside, it begins to rain. You hear the familiar patter on slate rooftops, a comfort to some, but for her, a problem. The washtub will need to be emptied by morning. If left standing, the water breeds flies. If tossed outside carelessly, it floods the backyard. So after she dries, she pulls on a shawl and carefully drags the tub, still half full, toward the rear door. She steps outside barefoot, not bothering to light a lamp. The backyard smells of ash and cabbage. She dumps the tub against the fence, watching the water spread over the dirt, lifting up loose bits of food waste and the broken stem of someone's old shoe. No one will say thank you. No one will even notice. But tomorrow morning, the tub will be clean, upright, ready again. Back inside, you glance around the empty parlour. The curtain has been tied back. The kettle emptied. The floor wiped hastily with an old cloth. In just a few hours, the room will return to its daytime function. Dining space, sitting room, drying rack. The bath will be packed away like a guilty secret, hidden under the stairs or behind the coal bin. It's easy to romanticize old rituals. Bath night sounds quaint from a distance. But you've seen it now. How much effort goes into a single shared wash. How many hands are blistered. How many backs are bent just for the smallest glimpse of cleanliness. You pass a row of houses on your way back to the main road. In some windows you see copper tubs propped against the wall. In others, just a bucket and a cloth. One window glows warmly, and through the lace curtain you glimpse a girl washing her face at a basin, steam rising from the bowl. Her hands move methodically, but her eyes are tired. Behind her, a man dozes by the hearth, his socks drying on the grate. There's nothing glamorous here, just routines carved out in cramped quarters. In a world where clean water is rationed and privacy is a rare luxury, the act of bathing is not indulgence, it's rebellion, a quiet protest against the dirt that creeps in from every direction. And yet, as you walk on, you pass one house that seems different. Larger windows, brighter lamps, and inside, a bathroom, a real one. You can't believe your eyes. A porcelain tub, tiled walls, a hand pump, brass and gleaming. Someone inside has just finished bathing. You see the towel hanging from a proper rail. A glimpse of the future, perhaps, but for now, just another reminder of who gets to feel clean and who merely pretends. You wake the next morning to a strange, almost sweet smell drifting in through the cracked window. It's sharp, chemical, and oddly comforting in a way that only makes sense if you've lived your entire life trying to mask the scent of rot. This is the scent of carbolic acid, and in Victorian England it's practically perfume. You follow it down the narrow corridor of a tenement building, past flaking plaster walls and stained floorboards, until you reach a stairwell where someone has set a small saucer of pale pink crystals beside the banister. The acid is meant to purify the air, not by removing the filth, but by smothering its smell with something stronger. And in a world where people still believe miasma, foul air, is what spreads disease, that makes perfect sense. You descend the stairs, passing open doorways where rags have been soaked in vinegar and nailed over the lintels. Bundles of dried herbs, lavender, rue, pennyroyal, dangle from hooks like talismans. Someone has even painted the inside of their window panes with thick tar-like oil. To keep the fever out, they explain, as if blacking out the sun might somehow shield the lungs. In this world, scent is strategy. The war against stench is constant, and the weapons are bizarre. You visit a market stall where a woman sells smell balls, porous clay spheres infused with camphor and rosemary. You're supposed to carry one in your pocket or hang it around your neck when passing through the more effluvious quarters of town. Another vendor hawks sachets of crushed fennel seeds and cloves sewn into lace pouches, promising relief from damp humours and odorous malaise. Even schoolboys walk with handkerchiefs tucked into their collars, soaked in rosewater or turpentine, depending on what their mothers can afford. You duck into a drawing room off a quiet street and are nearly knocked over by the scent of burning sulphur. The family is wealthy enough to have a doctor who makes house calls, and he's just prescribed an old favourite, fuming the home to cleanse the air. The windows are shut tight, the fireplace choked with yellow smoke, and everyone is sweating in silence. The lady of the house sits ramrod straight, eyes watering, insisting that they can already feel the fever lifting. Her husband looks less sure, one hand clutching a perfumed cloth over his nose. You slip back outside, blinking into the daylight, and nearly trip over a bucket placed just outside the front door. Inside, charred bits of resin and dried orange peel. Yet another air sweetener, one meant to be burned every morning to push back the bad airs. You notice similar buckets in front of several homes on the street, some still smouldering. And yet, for all the powders and posies and pungent remedies, nothing really works. Because the problem isn't the air, it never was. But you understand the desperation, the way smell attaches to fear. When cholera sweeps through a neighbourhood, people don't flee the source of the water, they flee the stink. They abandon homes where the walls smell sour. They refuse to enter buildings that feel too close, too still. Entire blocks become ghost towns overnight, based on nothing more than a whiff of something unpleasant. In that fear, an entire industry is born. Soap makers rebrand their wares as health purifiers. Cologne is advertised as protection, not vanity. Disinfectants become household staples, marketed as miracles. One label boasts, wards off pestilence. Another claims its formula is endorsed by physicians across the empire. Of course, most of it is nonsense. But if it smells strong enough, people believe it works. And in a city where belief can sometimes keep panic at bay, that's worth its weight in rosewater. You cross into a narrower lane now, one of those alleys where the light barely reaches the cobbles, and the smell has a weight to it, thick, sour and oddly metallic. Outside a butcher's shop, a young boy in a blood-spattered apron is dousing the doorstep with a bucket of lye water. He doesn't look at you, just keeps scrubbing with a stiff-bristled broom, muttering about keeping the stench from coming back. Around the corner, a woman is hammering shut the floorboards in her pantry, not because they're broken, but because she believes foul vapours are seeping up through the gaps. Her daughter stands nearby with a jar of crushed mint leaves, pressing the rim to her nose. She says the neighbours lost 2 children last week. The fever's in the walls, she whispers. It breathes up when it rains. You realise then that the war on smell has turned superstitious. Where the rich burn sulphur and cologne, the poor rely on layers of ritual and tradition, half medicine, half magic. And yet, in both cases, the goal is the same, to battle the invisible. You wander into a boarding house and are immediately enveloped in a haze of perfume and paraffin. A woman in a corset 2 sizes too small is spritzing every surface with lavender water. Doorknobs, chairbacks, even the coal scuttle. The doctor said scent is strength, she says, dabbing her wrists like it's a spell. In the corner, a makeshift altar glows with a dozen half-burned candles, each one labelled with a different scent. Sandalwood, pine, lemon balm. Some are homemade, others traded for bread. all of them burning to ward off what no one can see but everyone fears. And then there's the charcoal. You start noticing it everywhere. Bowls of it tucked beneath beds, behind chamber pots, on the mantelpiece beside photographs. People say it absorbs bad air, but most of it just sits in silence, doing nothing but darkening the dust around it. The irony's bitter. These homes smell more medicinal than clean. You cough as you pass through another room clouded with camphor smoke, eyes watering. A child is crouched in the corner with a vinegar-soaked rag over her mouth. Her mother waves a fan to move the air, convinced that circulation will keep the blood thin. Every household has its own version of this dance, choreographed by fear, desperation, and Victorian advertising. Even the city steps in. Posters go up in tenement courtyards urging residents to scrub their thresholds with lime wash. Public health inspectors make rounds with sniffing sticks. Yes, actual sticks, to test the air for dangerous vapours. Sometimes they chalk an X on a doorway, not because anyone is ill, but because it smells wrong. And the family inside, they have 2 days to clean up or they're evicted. Meanwhile, across town, perfume houses are making a fortune. Rosewater, bergamot, violet tincture. Households with means are practically drowning in scent. One woman even commissions a custom cologne for her privy, bottled in etched glass and labelled eau de clarity. You wonder what it smells like. Probably denial with a hint of lemon peel. But the most popular remedy by far is carbolic smoke balls, strange contraptions sold in pharmacies that emit plumes of acrid steam, promising to cleanse the air and strengthen the chest. You see one in action inside a tailor's shop. The clerk sits beside it all day, breathing through his mouth as the smoke curls around his moustache. His hands are stained with chalk and disinfectant. He hasn't been sick once this year, he says proudly, though he also hasn't been able to smell anything since April. As the evening settles in, you walk past rows of houses where windows glow faintly behind curtains soaked in vinegar. The city smells cleaner now. Not because it is, but because people have finally mastered the art of covering the stench with hope. The herbs, the smoke, the soap. It's all theatre. But in this theatre, the audience believes. And in a city that still hasn't connected its pipes, belief might be the only defence. And tomorrow, they'll do it all again. Light the candles, burn the sulphur, and hope that the scent of fear keeps the real sickness away. The street market is already alive with shouting when you step into the square. Hawkers waving ribbons of eels, women bargaining over bruised apples, children darting between carts with grimy hands and sunburnt cheeks. Somewhere near the edge of it all, you catch a whiff of something unexpected. A clean smell. Sharp. Soapy. Familiar. You follow it to a narrow stall stacked high with wedges of pale, crumbly bars. Soap. Real soap. Or at least someone's version of it. The vendor, an older man with a crooked smile and sleeves rolled up past his elbows, is shaving curls from a giant wheel of lye and tallow, wrapping them in newspaper and selling them for a halfpenny a bundle. "Smells like heaven, doesn't it?" he says, holding out a slice. "Made it myself from mutton fat and potash. Gets the filth right off, if you can keep your skin on." You smile, then wince, because he's not joking. This is what passes for soap for most working-class Victorians. A harsh, caustic brick that stings the skin, leaves your hands raw, and carries a faint aroma of last week's roast. It works, technically, but it's a far cry from the perfumed cakes advertised in upper-class catalogues. For the rich, soap comes moulded into delicate ovals, stamped with gold lettering, scented with orange blossom or almond. For the poor, it's brown, gritty, and often indistinguishable from the laundry soap used to scrub underclothes. You duck into a nearby home where a mother is boiling water over the hearth, shaving slivers of yellow soap into the pot. The smell is sharp, clean, yes, but nearly acidic. Her hands are red to the knuckles, knotted from years of wringing. She's scrubbing clothes in a zinc basin, working rhythmically, muttering under her breath. 2 children sit nearby, one scratching a rash on his elbow. "Soap burns," he says, not complaining, just explaining. But even bad soap is better than none, and for many families it's a luxury to be rationed. One bar might need to last the month. Some skip it entirely, opting instead for ash and water or scouring with sand and a bit of lard. In industrial towns, you hear of people using powdered brick or even urine left to ferment, an old Roman method, oddly preserved in the back streets of Sheffield. And yet, everywhere you go, people are obsessed with the idea of being clean. Not actually clean, but smelling clean, seeming clean. Because Victorian society places a moral weight on hygiene. To be dirty is to be suspected. To smell foul is to be judged. Even poverty itself is often explained away as a symptom of unclean living. You pass a wash house where women queue with baskets of linens, waiting their turn at the shared copper boiler. It's loud, steaming, and smells of bleach and sweat. Inside, one woman is scrubbing her hands raw, using a rough bar of carbolic soap that stains her palms pink. Another soaks a kerchief in lavender oil, presses it to her mouth, and breathes through it while she works. They exchange tips about what cuts grease best, what hides the smell of tobacco, what soothes chilblains. Then there are the ads. You see them everywhere. Posters and handbills promising transformation through soap. A child wrapped in lilies. A pale woman with hair cascading down her shoulders, holding a bar of Pears soap like a holy relic. Purity, the caption reads, for the mind and for the skin. These posters appear on public toilets, on shop walls, even above the urinals in gentlemen's clubs. You've seen families that can't afford bread still pin one up in the hallway, as if the image alone might cleanse the room. And the makers of these soaps, they know exactly what they're selling. Not cleanliness, but aspiration. Not soap, status. And you're about to meet the ones who sold it best. You turn down a quieter road now, past shop fronts with polished windows and names in gilded lettering. Apothecary, perfumer, soap merchant. This is where the real business of being clean is done. Not in the steaming wash houses or soot-darkened tenements, but in the perfumed glow of genteel commerce. And no one knew how to package purity like the Victorians. You enter a soap shop that smells like a dream. Orange blossom, violet, almond, and something powdery that clings to the air. Rows of soaps, each moulded into delicate shapes. Shells, roses, hearts, are lined up like jewellery. One is wrapped in silk paper and tied with a gold ribbon. Another boasts the Queen's coat of arms and a label that reads, "By appointment to Her Majesty." You lift it carefully. It weighs almost nothing, soft as wax, and costs more than an entire family's dinner. This is Pears's soap, the Empire's most famous cleansing agent, not because it worked better than homemade tallow bars, but because it came with a promise. A promise that soap didn't just wash the skin, it elevated the soul. Advertisements showed grubby children made angelic with a single lather. Dark-skinned figures became fairer by the magic of Pear's whitening formula. Imagery both disturbing and deeply embedded in the marketing of the time. Cleanliness wasn't just about dirt. It was about race, class, and morality. You study the posters behind the counter. One shows a white child scrubbing himself beside a globe, the soap bar in his hand glowing like a torch. The slogan reads, "The first step toward light." It's not subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. These ads sold a worldview, that hygiene, whiteness, and virtue were intertwined, and that soap was the bridge between the civilized and the uncivilized. But even among those who could afford it, Pears wasn't the only game in town. Dozens of soap makers competed for elite attention. Wright's coal tar soap, favoured for its medicated scent. Cusson's imperial leather, made with hints of myrrh and cinnamon, and Vinolia, with its creamy texture and subtle musk. Many were sold in boxes more elaborate than the product itself. Some came with poetry inserts. Others arrived with gift combs or tiny mirrors, tokens of refinement to place on the dressing table long after the soap had melted away. You glance at the customer beside you. She wears lace gloves and inspects a row of bath soaps like they're rare books. Her maid stands behind her with a parcel already wrapped. It's not clear whether the soap is for bathing or for display, or whether she even bathes at all. What matters is ownership. And then there are the health soaps. labelled antiseptic, cholera-resistant, pneumonia-preventing. No doctor endorsed them, no lab tested them, but the claims were bold and hopeful. Prevents foulness of the armpit and the soul, safe for infants, invalids, and the discerning husband. Even Queen Victoria was said to prefer lavender soap, though whether she used it, no one could say. You walk back out, head buzzing with fragrance. Down the street, a girl kneels by a puddle, scrubbing her hands with ash and rainwater. Behind her, a man with coal-streaked cheeks buys a sliver of yellow soap the size of a matchbox. His coat smells like wet wool and iron. He drops the soap into a tin cup and walks on. And in that moment you understand the gap, not just in wealth, but in meaning. For some, soap is survival. For others, it's performance. And in Victorian Britain, the illusion of cleanliness was often more valuable than the thing itself. You're in a quiet parlour now, watching as a young woman pins her hair back with careful fingers, each strand tucked with military precision. She dips her comb into a dish of rosewater and brushes slowly, her arms moving in graceful arcs. It looks effortless. But you've already learned better. Because in Victorian England, washing your hair was a dangerous luxury. She doesn't use soap. Almost no one does. Not on hair, anyway. The general belief, deeply rooted in both science and superstition, is that too much washing weakens the scalp, invites illness, or worse, insanity. A moist head was said to draw in cold air like a sponge, and from there the afflictions would travel downward, to the lungs, the nerves, the womb. Never wash your head on a Friday, her mother once warned. It invites death into the ears. And so, instead of washing, she powders. A mixture of starch and orris root is dusted along the part and combed through until the shine returns. It smells floral, almost pleasant. But beneath it, the hair is stiff with weeks of oil, soot, and sweat. Her bonnet hides the rest. For those who dare to wash, the ritual is elaborate. You've seen it once. A girl crouching beside a basin, head tilted, while another woman slowly pours rainwater from a jug. Rainwater is preferred. Soft, gentle. Well, water is too hard, full of lime and iron that leaves the hair brittle and yellowed. After soaking, the woman massages her scalp with egg yolks, or a concoction of rosemary steeped in gin, or even scraped ivy leaves soaked in water for 3 days. These methods aren't just cleaning, they're potions. Each family has its own recipe, handed down like heirlooms. But what matters more than cleanliness is appearances. The hair must shine, it must lay flat. It must suggest health, virtue, and restraint. So women brush it constantly, sometimes 100 strokes a night, not to detangle, but to redistribute oils and bring the blood to the scalp. They call it training the hair. You'd call it battle. You visit a boarding school next, where girls sit in rows before long mirrors, brushing in rhythm as their governess paces the hall. She checks for lice, for dandruff, for signs of neglect. A poorly kept head is seen as a sign of laziness or rebellion. One girl was sent home for having loose hair, though she claimed a gust of wind caught her bonnet. Another for daring to cut hers short. You ask how often they're allowed to wash it. The governor sniffs. Once a fortnight, if they've behaved. But she adds, more quietly, we use vinegar water when the smell gets strong. And it's not just women. Men, too, follow their own regimens. Pomades made of bear fat and lanolin. Brilliantine to add shine. Scented oils to hide the stale edge of unwashed scalps. One clerk tells you he's proud of his weekly hair tonic, a mixture of brandy, cloves, and soap bark. He hasn't actually washed his head in 6 weeks. Too risky this season, he explains, tapping his temple. Chills strike here first. At a fashionable salon in Mayfair, you watch a lady of means lower herself into a reclining chair as an attendant begins what's called a dry shampoo. Powder is puffed onto her roots, then brushed out again. The cloth beneath her hair darkens with each pass. She sighs with contentment, as though she's been transformed. And in a way she has. Because to the Victorians, cleanliness wasn't an act. It was a performance, and nowhere was the curtain drawn more tightly than over the head. But you'll see what happens when that curtain slips, and the smell begins to rise. You're sitting now in the corner of a modest tenement kitchen where a mother leans over her daughter, inspecting her scalp under the yellow glow of a gas lamp. The girl squirms. The mother clucks her tongue. "It's moving again," she says, not alarmed, just tired. She reaches for a fine-toothed comb and a bowl of kerosene water. Lice again. This is the darker side of unwashed Victorian hair, the part no one talks about in polite drawing rooms. In the lower classes, where baths are rare and powdered wigs are a long-forgotten joke, lice, nits, and even fleas take up residence like they own the place. It's not a sign of poor morals. It's not even a sign of laziness. It's just what happens when water is scarce. Soap is harsher than the skin can bear, and towels are shared by a family of 8. The comb moves slowly, scraping through the thick tangle. With each pass, the mother inspects the teeth for movement, dipping them into the bowl where a faint slick of oil rises. It smells of paraffin and peppermint, homemade, passed down from a neighbour who swears by it. You ask how often she does this. "Every Sunday," she replies. "After church, before the smell sets in." In the streets, you see other versions of this routine. Boys in news caps scratching behind their ears, girls plaiting hair already clumped with dirt, and one poor man with a beard so matted it's grown mossy at the edge. Barbers offer shaves and delousing for a few pence. Some even keep metal lice catchers, thin spring-loaded combs that trap the vermin and click when crushed. They're considered hygienic, efficient, and they sell out every winter. But it isn't just parasites. You begin to notice something else, the odour of unwashed scalps. It's a distinct smell, sour, slightly waxy, almost like old milk and iron. In close quarters, on omnibuses, in crowded theatres, in schoolrooms, it becomes overwhelming, and yet no one complains, because everyone has it. Well, not quite everyone. You pass by a pair of women arm in arm, fresh from a chemist shop. Their hair is piled high in careful buns, glistening in the gaslight. One carries a jar labelled Macassar oil, a fashionable tonic made from coconut, ylang-ylang, and rumours. It stains upholstery so badly that people now place anti-macassars, embroidered doilies, on the backs of chairs to catch the residue. In a world where cleanliness is performed, the mess behind it becomes someone else's problem. But these women glow with pride. Their hair smells faintly of lilac and lemon peel. They pass a pair of factory girls on the same pavement and don't spare them a glance. The air between them is scented with judgment. At a public bathhouse, you watch a woman shell out 3p for a wash. Just the hair, not the body. She steps into a narrow stall, kneels beside a basin and begins pouring. The soap is thin, the water lukewarm. She groans softly as her fingers work through weeks of oil, soot, and ash. The rinse bowl turns brown within seconds. She wrings her hair out over the slatted floor, steam curling up like a ghost from the drain. She doesn't speak as she leaves, just ties her scarf back on and walks out, head held a little higher, cleaner. Not clean maybe, but clean enough to be seen. And sometimes that's all you can ask. Because in Victorian England, washing your hair could make you sick or save your pride. It could expose you to cold or buy you a scrap of dignity. It could brand you as vain or elevate you to respectable. It depended on where you lived, who saw you, and how long you could go before the stink became stronger than the story you told about it. And you're not done yet. Because if you think this was intimate, wait until you see what they did with their teeth. The door creaks as you step into the narrow hallway of a Victorian dental parlour, or at least what passes for one. It smells faintly of cloves and chalk dust, with a deeper undertone of something metallic. There are no drills whirring, no gleaming chairs, just a tall wooden stool, a cracked mirror, and a tray of ominous-looking tools laid out like surgical instruments. The man behind the counter smiles at you with teeth that are not his own. "Cleaning, extraction, or polish?" he asks, as if you've come for a shoe shine. Welcome to the unspoken disaster of Victorian dental hygiene. You sit down in the corner and watch as a customer, pale and sweating, opens her mouth for inspection. The dentist leans in with a long metal pick and a bottle of brandy. There's no anaesthetic, not for cleaning, not for anything. If she flinches too hard, the tooth comes out, whether it needs to or not. But the woman isn't here because her teeth hurt. She's here because her gums bleed every time she bites into bread. Because she can't afford to lose another molar. Because in Victorian society, a ruined mouth means ruined status, and people are already whispering about how she smells when she speaks. You're beginning to realise that for most people there is no concept of brushing teeth daily. Toothbrushes exist, yes, usually made from bone handles and boar bristles, but they're a novelty, often shared between family members or used only before church. Tooth powders are common, made from salt, brick dust, or burnt bread crumbs. Some come scented with mint or clove oil. Others are so abrasive they wear the enamel away faster than the decay ever could. In one household you visit, the children each get one brush, once a year. They keep it in a jar by the stove, head down in a puddle of vinegar. The bristles bend like old broom straw. Still, the family's proud to have them at all. You open a cabinet in another home and find an old snuff tin filled with black powder. My grandfather's recipe, the owner explains. Charcoal, salt and sage. Kept his teeth till 65. You glance at the man's own mouth. He has none. What makes it worse is the food. Dense, hard, gritty. Bread is often bulked up with sawdust or alum. Sugar, now flooding in from the colonies, is both a luxury and a curse. Those who can afford it coat their tea, their biscuits, their jam, everything, with reckless abandon. And sugar doesn't just rot teeth quietly. It blackens them. It exposes roots. It turns every sweet bite into a slow, inevitable loss. You meet a young boy with a gap-toothed grin who says proudly that he's had 4 teeth pulled already. Can't bite apples, he shrugs, but I can whistle through the side. His older sister covers her mouth when she laughs, not from modesty but from shame. Among the upper class, the solutions are more expensive but no more effective. You enter the dressing room of a wealthy woman where a silver case holds her personal dental set. Brush, powder, tongue scraper, and a tiny mirror. She demonstrates how she applies powdered chalk with a swan feather puff. So much more refined than a bristle brush, she says. Her teeth are small even, and slightly grey, probably artificial. Porcelain dentures if she's lucky, vulcanite rubber if she's not. And then there are the charlatans. You pass a cart in the street where a man is selling tooth elixir, a cloudy green liquid that smells like turpentine. He swears it restores enamel, freshens breath, and tightens gums. Cures melancholia too, he adds with a wink. He's made 10 sales before you finish blinking. Back in the parlour, a man is gripping the arms of the stool while the dentist pulls with a pair of iron pliers. There's a snap, a groan, and the unmistakable metallic taste of blood fills the air. He spits the tooth into a pan and swigs from the bottle. No one applauds, no one reacts. Because here, in the Victorian bathroom, or what passes for one, this is just how things are done. And the worst part, there's still no toothpaste. You're back out on the street now, where a battered tin sign swings gently in the breeze. Teeth cleaned and pulled, no questions asked. The paint is flaking, and so are the teeth on the grinning skull beneath the text. You walk past it and duck into a corner chemist's shop, where the shelves are cluttered with tiny jars of tooth powders, breath tonics, and mysterious drops labelled essence of Mia or electric dentifrice. This is where the middle class comes to keep up appearances. You pick up one of the tins. It's decorated with gold foil and curlicues, but the ingredients list reads like a cleaning solution. Powdered oyster shell, borax and soap. The label promises to whiten teeth and invigorate the gums. You open the lid. It smells like lemon and chalk. You imagine pressing it to your gums every morning, and your teeth ache just thinking about it. And then you find the luxury version, imported from France, triple the price, with a faint rose scent and the promise of romantic breath. It's meant to be applied after cleaning, not before, because smelling right is more important than being right. Breath is everything in Victorian society. It's why people carry cloves in their pockets, chew on cardamom, or rinse with diluted vinegar. One woman tells you she keeps dried mint leaves under her tongue during dinner parties. You never know when a laugh will expose you, she whispers, and you don't want your mouth to betray you. In households that can't afford powders, people fall back on salt, or soot, or, if things are truly dire, their own spit and a bit of muslin. One man tells you he scrubs his teeth with a button sewn into a rag. Works as good as any brush, he claims, flashing a smile that's more gum than enamel. You pass through a schoolroom where children recite moral poems by heart, and then, once a week, line up to have their mouths inspected by the matron. She peers in with a small lamp and a stick, looking for sores, signs of decay, or missing teeth. There's no treatment, only observation. If something's wrong, a note is sent home. If it's serious, the child is sent to the local blacksmith who does extractions on Sundays. Yes, the blacksmith. It's not a myth. In towns without a resident dentist, tooth pulling was done by whoever had the strongest arms and the right pair of tongs. Some prefer the barber, others trust the midwife. But many still line up outside the forge, gripping their jaws, waiting for relief to be ripped from their mouths like a nail from a floorboard. And yet, even the best dental care of the time was built on pain and bravado. There's no Novocaine, no antiseptic rinses. A good dentist works fast. A great one distracts you with jokes. One poor man you meet says he sang hymns during all 5 of his extractions. Keeps the hand steady, he says, tapping his temple. False teeth are an art unto themselves. For the rich, it's porcelain or ivory, carefully carved and fitted into gold frames. For the rest, it's animal teeth, sometimes even human. Waterloo teeth, they were once called, plucked from the mouths of fallen soldiers and sold to dentists. You can't tell if that story is still true. You hope not. But the shade of one woman's smile is suspiciously off-white, and her breath carries the scent of boiled glue. You return to the same parlour where you started. A girl is sitting outside holding a cloth to her face, jaw swollen, eyes watery. She looks about 12. Her mother thanks the dentist, pays the fee, and guides her gently down the steps. You don't need to ask what was done. The basin full of blood by the door tells the story clearly enough, and tomorrow someone else will take her place. Because in Victorian England, oral hygiene isn't just unpleasant, it's an ordeal of class, pain, and silent endurance. And if your teeth survive the era intact, you're either rich, lucky, or simply very good at hiding the truth behind your smile. You're back in the bedroom now, quiet, warm, and seemingly clean. But lurking just beneath the surface of comfort is a question no one quite wants to answer. How do you wipe in a world without toilet paper? You lift the lid of the chamber pot. It's been used. That much is obvious. But nearby there's no roll, no tissue, no stack of folded squares. Instead, you find a bundle of rags tied loosely with twine and slightly damp. This is the secret kept beneath the bed, beside the basin, or hung discreetly behind the washstand. Personal cloths, reused, rinsed, and hung to dry, if you're lucky. Victorian wiping practices are a maze of improvisation, dictated entirely by class, geography, and whether or not your household can afford paper. In wealthier homes, soft squares of flannel or linen are used, collected in a small basket and laundered along with other unmentionables. In poorer homes, the options are less forgiving. You step into a tenement shared by 3 families. The privy in the yard is a wooden bench over a pit. The wiping cloth, old newspaper, torn into strips and threaded onto a nail beside the door. You run your fingers over the stiff, smudged paper. It crinkles like bark and smells faintly of fish and chimney soot. One mother tells you it's from last week's Illustrated London News. Better than using nothing, she shrugs, though the ink does leave a mark. In some homes, it's not even paper. You find rags cut from old dresses, squares of sacking, even worn-out stockings pressed into service. Some households assign each person a designated piece, washed and hung with a clothespin labelled with initials. Others simply hope no one notices who used what. Out in the countryside, things get even more creative. One woman describes using moss in the summer, soft and absorbent if picked fresh. In winter, corn husks when we can get 'em, and if not. We use what the good Lord provides, a vague answer, often meaning leaves, smooth stones, or in one desperate case, a rabbit's tail. You hope she was joking. You visit a boarding house where 12 lodgers share a single outhouse. There's a wooden box nailed to the inside wall with scraps of cloth stuffed into it. A sign reads, "Do not take rags home." Apparently some tenants were accused of stealing the wiping cloths, either to avoid the cold outhouse or simply because clean fabric was hard to come by. But no matter the method, one thing is clear: nobody talks about it. You ask 3 women in a row what they use, one laughs, another blushes, the third changes the subject entirely. It's a daily act wrapped in silence, one more part of the Victorian hygiene puzzle tucked beneath a layer of shame. And then, in a wealthier home, you spot something unusual, a ceramic jar labelled toilet paper. Your eyebrows lift. Inside are neat squares of smooth paper, soft and lightly scented. The family has ordered them from a new supplier, a stationer branching into the personal hygiene market. Each sheet is printed with a faint watermark, and you wonder whether anyone actually uses them or if they're just for show. The maid certainly doesn't. She still uses cut linen and a boiling pot to clean it afterward. You pass through the kitchen and see the water steaming on the hearth. A pair of stained cloths hang from the line above. The cook notices your glance. "We boil them twice," she says plainly. "Still don't get the smell out." And you realise something strange. For all the candles and perfumes and carbolic powders, this is the most intimate cleaning ritual of all, and the one most poorly equipped. Because in the end, even a porcelain chamber pot means little without something to follow it. And tomorrow morning someone will reach for another rag, another newspaper scrap, another square of dignity, wrung out, rinsed, and reused. You're standing now in a quiet laundry yard behind a row of terraced houses. The air is sharp with the smell of lye and wood smoke. Clotheslines stretch overhead like tired spider webs, and among the aprons and underthings you spot something smaller, more discreet. A line of cloth rags, freshly washed, flapping like flags of silent confession. You're watching the undercurrent of a world that runs on reuse. There's no waste bin for personal cloths, no flush to carry it all away, just boiling pots, soap shavings, scrubbing boards, and the hands of women who do this every day without thanks or complaint. A maid in one of the houses is elbow deep in a zinc tub. She scrubs the cloths used from the chamber pots, work she wouldn't dare describe in detail to her employer. "They like to imagine the house cleans itself," she mutters, twisting a rag between her knuckles until it squeaks. She rinses it, wrings it out, and pins it to the line next to the others. Each one is just a little different in shape or fabric, cut from old nightdresses, stained petticoats, worn shirts, all of them now stripped of their previous identities, reduced to this private, necessary function. You ask how often they're boiled. "Twice a week," she says. "More if someone's sick." If they're not properly boiled, the smell returns. Worse, so does the risk of spreading illness. Typhoid, dysentery, cholera. They don't care about modesty, and they live in the fibres. But even among those with means, this isn't glamorous. In another house, you find a locked cabinet in the bathroom labelled personal linens. Inside, rolled cloths, each embroidered with a single initial, washed weekly, pressed flat, and scented faintly with lavender. They're not soft, not disposable, just carefully hidden. Yet the truly wealthy are starting to abandon the cloth altogether. You see it first in a newly renovated townhouse, a delicate box on a shelf beside the water closet. Inside, thin sheets of medicated paper stacked like playing cards, printed with the logo of a new company, the British Perforated Paper Coand, Estersand, 1880. The sheets are stiff, slightly waxy, and smell faintly of carbolic. They're sold not in rolls, but in stacks, because the idea of rolling paper for bathroom use is still far too vulgar for polite society. The master of the house shows them off like a novelty. "Imported from London," he says proudly, tapping the box. "No more rags." But the servants still do the laundry. They know the rags haven't disappeared. They've just been pushed to the lower floors. Even hospitals aren't free from this divide. In the ward of a charity infirmary, you see a basket labelled clean pieces beside another labelled soiled. The nurses wear aprons and gloves, but the process is familiar. Rinse, boil, bleach if possible, hang. The work is constant. The smell lingers, and when rags tear or wear too thin, they're burned, at least in households that can afford a fire. In others, they're patched, mended, or layered with another scrap and used again. Nothing is wasted. Dignity is stitched together, one frayed edge at a time. You return once more to that chamber pot in the quiet bedroom, the cloth folded beside it like an afterthought. But now you understand what it means. Not just a tool, but a marker of class, of silence, of what must be done when no one wants to speak of it. There's a certain grace in it too, the care of washing, folding, hanging, reusing, a hidden rhythm of daily life that goes unpraised but keeps the household from descending into something worse. Because for the Victorians, sanitation isn't about sparkle or perfume, it's about control, over the mess, over the smell, over the body itself. And in a society obsessed with appearances, even wiping must be performed with discipline, even if no one ever says the word. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the scullery is already alive with movement. You're in the back of a large townhouse, where the marble halls and polished silver upstairs are made possible by something far less elegant below. Here, in the shadows of refinement, a young maid is tying a rag around her mouth as she lifts the lid on a heavy ceramic pot. The scent that escapes is sharp, sour and immediate. It clings to the throat. You turn away, but she doesn't flinch, because this is her job, emptying the chamber pots of an entire household before breakfast. Her hands move with speed and practice. One by one she collects the pots from bedrooms where no one will ever see her enter. She treads softly. She carries them with both hands, careful not to spill. Upstairs the family is still asleep, unaware, or rather unwilling to think, about what happens to the contents of last night's indigestion or tea-fueled urgency. But the maid knows. Every morning begins with filth. She takes the pots to the slop sink, a deep stone basin set against the far wall, stained from years of use. There, she empties them into a bucket of ashes and lime to mask the smell, before scrubbing them with scalding water and a brush worn nearly to its handle. The noise echoes against the bare brick walls. One pot cracks at the rim. She winces, not from pain, but from dread. Breakages come out of her wages. This is the side of Victorian hygiene that the etiquette books never mention. The labour of the servants. Every pristine chamber pot, every tidy water closet, every rose-scented towel owes its cleanliness to someone hunched over a basin, with raw hands and a rag that will never truly be clean again. In grander houses, this work is divided. The under-housemaid collects the soiled pots. The scullery maid washes them. The housekeeper ensures the whole process remains invisible. But in smaller households, like the one you're in, one girl does it all. And no matter how hard she works, she's expected to be invisible too. You ask her how many pots she scrubs in a day. 8, sometimes 10, she says, scrubbing a stubborn ring inside one with salt and lemon peel. Twice if there's guests, more if someone's ill. She pauses. Sometimes I don't eat till after. You don't ask why. You already know. But chamber pots are just the beginning. As the house wakes, the calls begin. Hot water, Mary. Bring the washing bowl. Where's the towel, girl? One mistress prefers her pitcher filled with rose water. Another insists her flannel be warmed by the fire first. A gentleman requests a fresh sponge. Mary runs back and forth with arms full of linen and jugs of steaming water, careful not to spill a drop on the polished floor. Later she'll clean their toothbrushes, bone handles, shared bristles, by dipping them in vinegar. She'll scrub their towels, thick with sweat and powder, in a separate pail. She'll dry their wiping rags and stack them neatly in drawers she isn't allowed to open when the mistress is present. And still, she must be cheerful. She must knock softly, speak only when spoken to. And if something smells amiss upstairs, it's her fault, not the lady who overstuffed the pot, not the gentleman who spilled the basin, not the guest who wiped with a lace handkerchief and left it folded beside the bed. No, the blame always flows downhill, just like everything else. By mid-morning, the scullery floor is slick with soap and slop water. Mary slips once, hard, and bites her lip to keep from crying out. She rights herself, keeps scrubbing, and does not mention the bruise she'll carry for days. Upstairs, someone rings a bell for more water. The day has only just begun. By early afternoon, the air in the scullery is thick with steam and fatigue. Mary wipes her forehead with the edge of her apron, which is already soaked from repeated trips to the slop sink. A stack of freshly rinsed chamber pots sits drying on a wooden rack, each one gleaming in the dim light. She scrubbed them so well you can see faint reflections in the glaze, but there's no praise waiting for her. Just more linen to be boiled. She's not alone in this rhythm. In townhouses, manors and boarding houses across Victorian Britain, thousands of girls just like her perform the same unseen labour, day after day. Many are under 15. Most earn a wage so small it wouldn't cover the cost of a single bottle of rosewater, and all of them, at one point or another, have been blamed for a smell that wasn't theirs. You move through another house now, a grand one, the kind with bay windows and imported wallpaper. It has 5 bedrooms, 3 water closets, and a household of 11. But still, only one maid tends to all the dirty work. You find her outside pouring a bucket of dark liquid into a corner drain behind the stables. She scrubs the bucket with a brush that's missing half its bristles, then sets it upside down to dry. "Better out here than inside," she says. "If the lady smells anything upstairs, she'll have me scrubbing the skirting boards till midnight." This fear of scent is more than just vanity. In the Victorian household, cleanliness is a form of social performance, and the servant bears the burden of keeping up the act. Even when illness strikes, the maid is often the first to be blamed. The chamber wasn't emptied. She must have used the wrong soap. She didn't boil the cloths long enough. Whether it's typhus or just an upset stomach, the response is always the same: bleach everything and punish the maid. Some households keep ledgers, not of expenses but of smells. Yes, really. You see one in the hands of a fastidious housekeeper. April 3rd, slight odour in second guest room, Mary questioned. Chamber rewashed. She reads it aloud with the solemnity of a sermon. The maid in question. She's 17. Quiet. Her hands shake slightly as she folds the towels, hoping they dry without spotting. There are no days off, no privacy, no safe place to cry. And what happens when she falls ill? She's expected to keep working, of course, to scrub the very chamber pots she's just vomited beside. There's no backup, no sick leave. One girl in another house lost consciousness while boiling laundry and nearly fell into the copper. They pulled her out just in time and had her back at work within 2 days. You hear stories whispered among the servants. One about a maid who was dismissed for breaking a pot on the stairs. Another who dropped a jar of tooth powder and was accused of stealing. One girl was sent away in disgrace because the master claimed she had brought an odour into the nursery. No one asked if she had a fever. But worst of all, the silence. The way no one upstairs ever says thank you. The way a clean chamber pot simply appears like magic. The way fresh towels are laid out without question. Warm water drawn before dawn. Perfume set on the washstand as if they grew there naturally. You return to Mary's scullery as dusk falls. She's emptying the last basin, her hands wrinkled and raw. The floor is finally dry. The pots are stacked neatly in the cupboard. The cloths are hanging by the stove. She leans against the wall for just a moment. No one calls, no one notices. And tomorrow, before the first boot hits the floor upstairs, she'll be here again. Quietly doing the work no one wants to acknowledge, keeping the illusion of cleanliness alive, one blister at a time. Because in Victorian households, sanitation wasn't just a matter of hygiene, it was hierarchy, measured in silence. It's a cloudy morning in a modest Victorian boarding house, and you're standing in a cramped corner of the first floor corridor. There's a worn wooden door in front of you with a makeshift sign that reads WC in faded pencil. It's the only water closet in the house, and it serves all 9 tenants. You wait and wait. Until the door creaks open, and a tired man in shirt sleeves and suspenders steps out, muttering something about damp matches and never enough time. You step inside, and instantly your nose regrets it. Because here it is, the newest technology in town, the water closet, and it already reeks. The walls are streaked with mildew. The single candle stub offers no comfort. A cracked ceramic bowl sits beneath a wooden seat, the water inside murky and motionless. There's a pull chain dangling from an iron cistern overhead, but it doesn't always flush. Sometimes it doesn't fill, sometimes it overflows, and there's no sewer gas trap, so when things back up, which they often do, the smell climbs right back up the pipe and into your sinuses like an uninvited guest. You sit carefully, wondering if you'll tip the whole contraption over. The floorboards wobble, the air is heavy, and the toilet paper is just a small stack of torn newspaper squares hanging on a rusty hook. This, in theory, is progress. You remember when the chamber pot was the only option, tucked under the bed, waiting to be sloshed out a window. But now, indoor plumbing is spreading across the city, especially in newly built homes and wealthier neighbourhoods. Only problem? The pipes can't keep up. In many Victorian cities, especially London, the rush to install water closets led to a plumbing crisis. Builders added toilets before city planners had figured out how to expand the sewer system, so you ended up with houses full of WCs, connected to nothing, or worse, connected to cesspools. You step back outside, relieved to breathe again, and spot a man in a tweed coat inspecting the pipes along the side of the house. He's a sanitary engineer, and he's muttering to himself about faulty valves and inverted traps. You ask if the toilet is safe. He shrugs. Depends what's beneath it, he says. Sometimes we find raw sewage collecting under the floorboards. You blink. He continues. They keep adding closets without venting the lines. No U-bends, no water seals, just a straight pipe to hell. And then they wonder why the parlour smells like a sewer. The problem isn't just technical, it's cultural. The water closet was a status symbol, not a sanitary necessity. For upper-class Victorians, having an indoor toilet became a way to show off refinement. But few understood the science. Ventilation was often ignored. Builders cut corners, and many refused to believe that sewer gases could carry disease. Remember that cholera outbreak in 1854? The one that finally convinced people it wasn't miasma, but contaminated water causing the deaths. That knowledge hadn't reached every builder or landlady yet. So when pipes leaked, or drains clogged, or closets overflowed, many simply blamed bad air and lit a candle. You follow the sanitary engineer to the house next door. This one's more modern. He opens a clean, tiled lavatory and points to the polished brass pipe beneath the basin. See that curve? That's a P-trap. It keeps sewer gas from coming up. You nod. Then he gestures to the wooden box housing the cistern. But if the flush doesn't clear the bowl completely, waste sits, bacteria builds, smell rises. He lifts the lid on the tank. This one's jammed with limescale, no pressure. You peek closer. Inside the tank it looks like a coral reef of hardened minerals, and suddenly the whole idea of Victorian progress feels a bit crusty. You step into a grander home now, a townhouse with elegant cornices and polished banisters. The lavatory here is a marvel. Blue and white tile floor, floral wallpaper, and a gleaming porcelain fixture crowned with a tall wooden cistern. This is what polite society calls a modern convenience. And yet, despite all the glamour, you can't help but wrinkle your nose. Because just like the boarding house before, something isn't quite right. This water closet flushes into a cesspit buried under the garden. It's a common workaround. Connecting to the city sewer costs money, and many well-to-do homeowners find it cheaper to dig a private pit and pretend the waste disappears. Problem is, it doesn't. It festers. Some of these cesspits are bricked over, others left bare. A bubbling stew of human waste, paper and rainfall, all just feet from the back parlour. On humid days, the odour creeps through the floorboards. In the winter, it freezes and cracks the tiles. And during floods, it rises. A servant opens the window, hoping a lavender sachet will mask the stench. It doesn't. Down in the pantry, the cook gags, convinced the potatoes have gone off. Upstairs, no one suspects the shining toilet to be the culprit. It was installed at great expense. It's the very picture of progress. How could it possibly stink? Well, remember the engineer from earlier? He returns in this house too, crawling beneath floorboards, prying open pipe joints, shaking his head at what he calls trapless horrors. In some cases, there isn't even a true soil pipe, just a wooden chute lined with pitch. You imagine water trickling down one of these crude constructions, slowing with every inch, leaving behind a trail of slime. Not exactly the marvel of hygiene Victorians hoped for. The truth is, many early water closets actually made things worse, especially when you consider where their contents ended up. Some towns dumped waste directly into rivers, others relied on night soil men to periodically empty cesspools, often by hand in the dead of night, hauling bucket after bucket of fetid sludge through city streets. These men were called toshers or muckrakers, and they sometimes earned extra coin by scavenging valuables from the filth. Coins, jewellery, even lost dentures. You picture one now, lantern dangling from his belt, descending into a cramped brick tunnel behind a respectable home. His boots squelch. He mutters a prayer. If he slips, there's no one to pull him out. Back above ground, a lady of the house writes a letter to her cousin in Bath. She raves about her new indoor convenience and how refined it feels. Meanwhile, a pipe just below her feet is leaking brown water into the kitchen ceiling. The gap between appearance and reality has never been wider. Even worse, some households chose ornament over function. Lavatories were designed with padded seats, carved mahogany lids, and even decorative tiles bearing biblical scenes. You sit on one and stare at a painted angel while something unspeakable gurgles below, a contradiction so perfect it almost feels deliberate. And yet, despite all of this, the Victorian obsession with flushing grows. Public lavatories appear in parks and rail stations, often with a penny slot on the door. Men line up, women wait, builders compete over who can offer the most discreet pipework, the most elegant pull chain, the quietest flush. But none of this solves the underlying problem. There's still nowhere for the waste to go. Until the great sewer projects catch up, and that won't be for decades, millions of toilets across Britain simply shift the problem from chamber pots to walls and floors, cloaking the old filth in new porcelain. So the next time you see a dainty Victorian powder room in a museum or period drama, remember the cesspit lurking below, and the poor engineer with his arms elbow-deep in pipe grease, muttering about unvented junctions while tea is served upstairs. You're back on the street now, walking through a working-class district thick with coal smoke and morning fog. The buildings lean toward each other, their brickwork chipped and darkened by soot. As you pass one row house after another, you notice something odd. Small stone sheds in the narrow alley behind each home. These aren't storage rooms, they're privies, and today you're going to see how they worked. You slip through a side gate, shoes crunching on cinders, and approach one of these backyard outhouses. It's barely larger than a broom cupboard, with a slanted slate roof and a wooden door that doesn't quite shut. Inside is a single plank bench with a hole in the centre, and beneath that, a brick-lined pit. No water, no flush. Just a dry earth closet if you're lucky. If not, it's simply a hole. You lower yourself onto the cold seat and try not to breathe through your nose. It's dark. It's damp. You jump when you hear movement below, just a rat probably. Maybe a beetle. You make it quick. This is what passed for sanitation in much of urban Victorian England. Most homes didn't have indoor plumbing. Instead, each family used the privy around the back, shared with neighbours or sometimes reserved for several tenants in the same lodging. It wasn't unusual for a dozen people to share a single seat. And the real surprise, these privies often weren't emptied for weeks. Enter the night soil men. You might remember them from earlier, the brave, unfortunate souls whose job it was to remove human waste from these pits. Some cities had carts that came by once or twice a month. Others left it to private contractors, who waited until the pit was full to the brim before doing anything at all. By then, the smell had seeped into everything. Your laundry on the line, the bread in the kitchen, the baby's blanket. You hear a commotion behind you and turn. A pair of boys are laughing, poking at a neighbouring privy with a stick. One of them dares the other to tip it. This is privy tipping, a cruel prank that left families humiliated and scrambling to clean their yard before breakfast. But there's nothing funny about the dangers these toilets posed. Overflow was common, especially during heavy rain. In some neighbourhoods, privies were built directly over shallow wells, contaminating the drinking water. You stop realising just how many things in the city are connected in ways they shouldn't be. One leaky wall here, one shared bucket there, and suddenly an entire street is coughing up blood. You knock on the back door of the house, and a tired woman opens it. She invites you in, wiping her hands on her apron, and motions toward a covered bucket near the hearth. "We use the pail system now," she says. "Cleaner, they say. They take it away every few days." You glance at the container, enamelled metal with a tightly fitted lid. It seems more dignified, perhaps, but you imagine the person tasked with carrying it through narrow hallways and out to the street, and the word dignity slips away. She sighs. Better than nothing, I suppose. You sit in her kitchen a moment longer, noticing the bitter soap smell in the air. She tells you about a neighbour who got sick last winter. Bad fever, stomach cramps, died within the week. They said it was the water, she whispers, and nods toward the tap in the yard. You swallow. Progress in sanitation was slow, uneven, and often dependent on class. The city might be laying new sewer lines downtown, but out here, dry pits and tin pails were the reality. And tomorrow morning, a man in a brown coat will come by with a cart, empty each one into a barrel and move on. No gloves, no mask, just a bucket, a shovel, and the hope that he finishes before lunch. You follow the pail cart now, staying a few steps behind as it rolls down the narrow alleyway. Its iron wheels clatter against cobblestones, and a faint wet trail darkens the path behind it. The man pushing it, bent at the shoulders, face hidden beneath a cap, stops at every third or fourth doorway. Sometimes he has to knock and wait. Other times the bucket is already sitting by the steps, tightly sealed and quietly steaming in the morning chill. No one thanks him. No one meets his eyes. This is the pail system, hailed by reformers as a step forward. In towns like Manchester and Rochdale, it was offered as an alternative to overflowing cesspits and foul-smelling privies. The idea was simple: a watertight metal container collected regularly, cleaned at a central depot, and returned. But in practice, it depended on punctuality, discretion, and sheer tolerance for stink. You trail behind him to the depot, a low building near the edge of town where dozens of men in rubber aprons work among racks of pails and vats of lime. The air here is unholy, and the work relentless. One man lifts a lid, gags, dumps the contents into a trench. Another hoses down the empty pail, scrubs it with a stiff brush, then lines it with sawdust and sets it on a rack to dry. No one talks. The depot is quiet except for the slap of water, the groan of metal, and the occasional cough that never quite goes away. You slip into the office and find a ledger on the desk. Rows of names, addresses, tallies. Some marked in red, missed collections, overdue fees. You spot a note scrawled in the margins. Don't collect from just 18 again. Left too full. Dangerous. You remember Sasha 18. It was the house with the cracked stone steps and the drooping fence. Probably couldn't pay. Probably too embarrassed to ask for help. And yet here, in this forgotten depot, public health is held together by men like these. Unsung, invisible, and rapidly disappearing by the century's end as water closets take over. You sit outside a moment, letting the cold air scrub your lungs. In the distance, factory whistles begin to howl. The day is starting. Housewives will open their curtains, schoolboys will run past tipped pails, and no one will speak of the men who vanished them. Still, not everyone embraced the pail. In some neighbourhoods, tenants refused to switch, preferring their old privies despite the mess. "At least it's ours," one woman says, leaning over a back fence. "That cart smells like death." And she's not wrong. Mishandled pails could spill. Some rusted through. Others leaked down stairwells or left grim trails up 2 flights of tenement stairs. And if you think that's bad, remember, In winter, the contents froze solid. No easy disposal then. You hear of one collector who slipped on an icy patch, spilling his entire load across a pub entrance. Took 2 hours to clean, and the smell never really left. They had to salt the floor and hang eucalyptus from the rafters. Despite these horrors, reformers persisted. They published charts, lobbied councils, held town meetings with diagrams of disease spread, and slowly, grudgingly, change came. More frequent collections, better pale designs, disinfection protocols. But at the end of the day, it still came down to a man, a cart, and a lid that might not seal properly. And in homes without back doors, the pail had to be carried through the front parlour. Yes, past the rug, past the piano, past the guests if there were any. One poor maid dropped hers near the hearth during a dinner party. It made the local paper. Her employers dismissed her the next day, of course. They said the stain wouldn't come out. So next time you light a lavender candle in your bathroom, think of her. And of all the hands that made your modern flush possible. You've seen the outhouses, endured the pail system, and held your breath through the back alleys. But now it's time to step into the future. Well, what passed for the future in 1880s London? You find yourself walking through a newly developed row of terraced houses, red brick and nearly identical, with polished boot scrapers at every doorstep and narrow iron gates that squeak just so when opened. And inside one of these, for the first time, you find a marvel. A room, not a closet, not a shed, but a proper bathroom. And in it, glory of glories, a water closet, a toilet indoors with a seat that doesn't splinter, and a lever that, when pulled, unleashes a heavenly whoosh of rushing water. You pull it, just once, just to hear it again. This, right here, is the beginning of a new era, the rise of the indoor flush toilet. And to understand why this matters, you only have to remember the privy pit behind the brick wall from 3 streets back. But it wasn't just convenience that made the water closet revolutionary. It was status. Only wealthier families could afford it at first. Indoor plumbing meant copper piping, running water, a connection to the new city sewer lines. It meant cleanliness, or at least the illusion of it. It meant you were civilized, modern, respectable. You wander down the hallway, eyes landing on the bathroom's other features. A white porcelain basin with a brass tap. A tin bath tucked against the wall. A small cupboard containing carbolic soap, borax, and of all things, tooth powder in a little glass jar. You pop the lid and sniff, mint and chalk. But just because a home had plumbing didn't mean it worked well. Pipes froze in the winter, leaked in the summer, and groaned at all hours. More than one housemaid was startled by a pipe coughing up rust. And then there was the water pressure, weak, erratic, and wholly dependent on your neighbourhood's elevation. In some homes, the upstairs toilet was more wish than function. Still, the flush was progress. Sort of. There was, however, one major hitch. The sewers. Because even if your gleaming new toilet was working perfectly, that waste had to go somewhere. And in the early years, it often went exactly where it shouldn't. You climb down a few stone steps into the basement of the house and find a metal hatch. Behind it is the old soil pipe, an iron tube that snakes down to the street and, in theory, connects to the city's new main sewer. But not every home was properly connected. Some just dumped into soak pits, where waste pooled and lingered until it filtered, slowly and dangerously, into the earth. You lift the hatch, then quickly regret it. Even here, in this lovely home with a polished stair rail and lace curtains, the scent lingers. In the kitchen, the mistress of the house tells you about her neighbour's scandal. The bathroom flooded. It ran down the stairs like a waterfall. My Henry said it smelled like the Thames at low tide. She pauses. But it's still better than a chamber pot. You nod, solemn, because she's right. And yet, there's something oddly risky about this new indoor luxury. It invites waste into the home, only promising to whisk it away if every valve and pipe behaves. And in 1883, that was still a bold assumption. Then she shows you a curious booklet kept by her husband. It's his patent folder, she says. Inside are cuttings from newspapers and sketches of a new kind of toilet flush, a valveless siphon jet designed to reduce clogging. You admire it, though you suspect the system still clogs every other Tuesday. She beams with pride. It's the future, she says, and it is. But the future smells faintly of rust, lye, and boiled cabbage. You linger a moment longer in that modest bathroom with its creaking pipes and glimmer of modernity, but soon curiosity pulls you farther, to the homes of the truly wealthy, the ones with parlours bigger than most cottages and carpets thick enough to swallow the sound of your own footsteps. Here, the bathroom isn't just a utility, it's a statement. You enter one such townhouse off Grosvenor Square, where the housekeeper greets you with a practised nod. She's used to callers. The master's proud of his upgrades, she explains, and he's not shy about showing them off. You follow her up a staircase wrapped in velvet runner, past a chandelier glittering with gaslight, and into what might as well be a temple to hygiene and spectacle. The bathroom is the size of a bedroom, fitted with polished marble tiles, gold-trimmed fittings, and not one but two basins. His and hers, of course. In the centre sits an enormous bathtub raised on clawed feet, enamelled in seafoam green. Beside it, a matching pedestal toilet taller than most chamber pots and embossed with decorative cherubs on the tank. And yet, even here in this oasis of indoor opulence, things aren't quite right. You notice a faint smell. Roses and lavender, yes, but undercut by the sharp tang of standing water. The pipes hum faintly, the tank gurgles, and as you peer into the corner, you find a tall wooden cupboard containing not towels, but buckets of ashes. The housekeeper sees your puzzled glance. "Therefore when the flush won't do," she says simply. "Happens more often than you'd think." Despite the grandeur, these early water closets were temperamental. The U-bend had only just been introduced a few years prior, and traps weren't always reliable. If the seal failed, sewer gas could rise straight back into the house. That sweet stink of privilege. Often just a spritz of rose water covering a leak. You spot a bell pull beside the toilet. "In case of mishap," the housekeeper murmurs. And mishaps were common. Guests occasionally mistook the flush mechanism for something else, broke it, or worse, triggered a spray from a misaligned pipe. There's a story, whispered at garden parties, about a viscount who emerged drenched from the master bath, having sat too close when the boiler kicked in. But this didn't deter the rich. No, they doubled down. Imported porcelain from France, German fittings, American siphons. Some even hired toilet valets, servants trained specifically to maintain the system, keep the valves greased, and discreetly manage malfunctions. It was all part of the illusion that modern life had conquered waste, that wealth could insulate you from stench, and that every flush was a triumph over chaos. You step into another townhouse, this one more subdued, and find a young girl reading in the hallway. She looks up. "We're not allowed to use the big toilet," she whispers. "Only guests do. Ours is still in the garden." She points out back, and sure enough, nestled behind a rose trellis is a small brick privy, just like the ones you saw on the other side of town. Because plumbing was expensive. Even for the well-to-do, full house retrofits were a years-long project. Many homes had a single water closet for show, while the staff, and sometimes even the family, still relied on privies or commodes for daily use. You can't help but laugh quietly. The future was here, yes. But like most things in the Victorian age, it arrived unevenly, awkwardly, and with a lingering smell of lime and ambition. Still, one thing's for certain. The bathroom was no longer hidden. It had entered the home, demanded decoration, and become part of the house tour. Even if you needed a backup bucket just in case. You wake to the muffled clatter of boots on cobblestones and the cry of a milkman rattling bottles into wire baskets. The city stirs, clogged, damp, and very much alive. But this morning, you're not headed into a fine townhouse or a terraced row. You're going under the city. It begins with a narrow stairwell behind an iron gate, tucked behind a soot-streaked building near Fleet Street. The descent is steep, damp underfoot, and filled with the earthy scent of brick and lye. At the bottom, You push through a low wooden door and emerge into a vaulted tunnel lit by sputtering gas lamps. Welcome to the world beneath the flush, the London sewers. The Victorian sewer system is one of the most impressive feats of engineering in its day. Massive, smelly, and absolutely necessary. You walk along a raised walkway as dark water gurgles below, carrying the waste of thousands toward the outfalls downstream. You can still smell the Thames in here, a low fermenting tang of everything the city wants to forget. The man leading your little tour today is a flush inspector, though the men call him Pipe Rat. He carries a long pole, a lantern, and an iron nose for blockages. He pauses and points at a junction ahead where two brick channels merge into a great round chamber, marked with soot and streaks of old lime. That there, he says, that's where the rich and the poor all come together. You glance down at the bubbling flow. You believe him. The inspector's job is brutal. He checks for clogs, fatbergs some call them, massive build-ups of grease, soap, hair, and waste that choke the tunnels and send sewage back up into the streets. You've heard the horror stories. Basements flooded knee-deep, toilets erupting like geysers, and worse, families blaming one another as if plumbing failure were a personal flaw. A few paces on, he shows you a side shaft where a ladder descends into pitch black. That's the rat hole, he says. We drop lime down there. You ask why. He just says, because they're alive. You move on. These sewers, laid out under the guidance of Joseph Basil Jett, were built after the Great Stink of 1858, when the smell of the Thames drove Parliament to finally act. His solution was elegant. Miles of underground brickwork carrying sewage away from the city centre, out past the reach of human noses. It worked. Mostly. But only if people connected their homes properly. And many, especially in poorer districts, simply didn't. The inspector stops again at a junction. He pulls open a rusty metal grate and shines his lantern down. See that, he says, pointing to a thick bundle of what looks like wet rags. That's toilet paper, the fancy kind. Clogs like you wouldn't believe, he spits. Give me good old-fashioned newspaper any day. You didn't think you'd hear someone curse toilet paper, but here we are. As you walk deeper into the tunnel, you notice carvings etched into the bricks. Dates, names, crude symbols. Workers from decades ago leaving their mark. There's one, the inspector says, pointing. That's me, 1874. Lost a boot in this shaft. The pipes groan above you as someone somewhere flushes. It's a strange kind of intimacy, knowing the city's guts this way. For every gilded toilet bowl upstairs, there's a man down here keeping it all from backing up. He doesn't look particularly proud, but there's something in the way he taps the brick arch overhead, as if to say, this holds more of the city together than any parliament. And you suspect he's right. You keep walking through the belly of the city, your boots slipping slightly on the slick stone. The tunnel narrows, and the air grows warmer, thicker. Somewhere ahead, a valve lets off a rattling hiss. The inspector gestures toward it with a grunt. Pressure bleed. Without those, we'd all be up to our elbows in it. The walls drip. The bricks feel close. And in this moment you realise how precarious Victorian sanitation still is, even with miles of sewer, with steam pumps, with Bazalgette's grand design. None of it works perfectly. It all depends on constant vigilance, on valves staying tight, on people not flushing dead pets, kitchen grease, or the wrong kind of paper. And yet, they do. The inspector leads you into a low-side chamber nicknamed the Trap. Here's where things collect. Broken crockery, lost trinkets, and on occasion, more unsettling finds. He once pulled a set of dentures from this very spot. Another time, a severed pig's head. Sometimes it's worse. You decide not to ask what worse means. In this place, you feel the invisible boundary between above and below, how the polished mahogany toilet seat upstairs depends on the hidden labour of men wading through sludge, and how, no matter how fine the fittings, nothing flushed ever really disappears. You sit for a moment on the edge of a stone ledge while the inspector checks a vent. He pulls something out of his bag, A curved iron wrench with a wooden handle, worn smooth. "This here's saved my life twice," he says. "Once, when a pipe burst and nearly scalded him. Once more, when a rat leapt at his face and he batted it away mid-air." He chuckles. You don't forget a rat in flight. You chuckle too, but your stomach flips. This isn't the world seen on guest tours or in illustrated magazines. This is the guts of Victorian modernity, where waste moves in the dark and men carry lanterns to keep it moving. You exit with him hours later, blinking into daylight. The inspector squints at the sky, tips his cap and disappears back into the warren below. You walk the streets differently now. That ornate manhole cover outside the bakery? A doorway to chaos should it fail. And fail it sometimes did. Even with Bazalgette's sewers, overflow still happened. Heavy rains could flood the tunnels. Some houses had return valves installed to stop backflow, but only the wealthier households could afford them. In poorer areas, a storm could mean nightmarish floods. One written account tells of a family woken by the sound of splashing, only to find their parlour carpet floating, the sofa bobbing gently in a pool of sewage. And for all the promise of cleanliness, diseases still stalk the city. Typhoid, dysentery. Cholera's memory still hung in the air, even if the water now flowed faster. The greatest irony? The city had solved the where does it go problem, but not the who keeps it working one. And so you pause on a quiet street corner, watching a man in a brown uniform lift a grate with a hooked rod, disappearing briefly into shadow. He's part of the hidden orchestra, unseen, unthanked, unmissed, until disaster strikes. And while others might raise a glass to Queen Victoria and progress, you find yourself silently raising one to the men of the tunnels, the rat fighters, grease breakers, and stench tamers who, quite literally, kept civilization from going under. You find yourself in front of a squat red brick structure tucked behind a butcher's yard, easy to miss unless you're looking for it. A battered sign over the lintel reads Public Baths and Wash House. You step inside, and the world shifts. Gone is the chaos of soot-choked streets and thunderous omnibus wheels. In here, the air is wet, warm, and echoing with the hollow slap of water basins and the low murmur of worn voices. Welcome to one of the few places in Victorian London where a working-class soul could get properly clean for a fee. But don't expect a spa. The corridor smells of carbolic soap and overused mops. The woman at the entrance booth, hair pinned tight, apron grey with wear, hands you a small brass token. "Half hour. Hot if the boiler holds," she says. No smile. You step into a row of wooden doors, each marked with chalked numbers. You choose number 6. Inside, a tin bath stands on flagstones, with 2 taps and a battered stool. The hot tap gurgles uncertainly. A narrow pipe above emits hissing steam. You strip down and let the hot and cold water mix slowly in the tub, the warmth creeping in. This is a municipal bathhouse, one of many built in the late 19th century to bring hygiene to neighbourhoods where tenement homes had no baths at all. It wasn't charity, it was survival. After all, when diseases spread by touch, filth became a public risk, not just a private shame. You settle into the water, knees poking above the surface. It's not luxurious, but it's better than the alternative, scrubbing in a washtub in a cold room with water boiled on a smoky stove. And that's assuming you could afford the coal. In the stall beside you, someone groans as they lower into the heat. The walls are thin. You hear splashes, coughs, the occasional curse. It's not exactly relaxing. But in this moment, you understand why people waited in line, why women came with small children in tow, why some men quietly stayed an extra minute until knocked on. Hot water is freedom, even if it smells faintly of iron and lingers on the skin. Still, the rules are strict. Bath attendants patrol the halls, knocking sharply when your time runs out. Soap is not always provided. Towels cost extra. If you want privacy, forget it. Most of the city still bathes with a bucket behind a curtain or not at all. This is already a step up. You spot a faint red stain around the edge of your tap. Rust or something else? Hard to say. But you decide not to dwell. Everyone who comes here has long made peace with a certain level of grime. Even the so-called clean places in Victorian life are stained at the edges. You close your eyes and lean back, hearing a child cry 3 stalls down. A woman hushes him. The floors creak. Someone laughs. It's communal, not by design but by necessity. And despite the cracked tiles, the peeling paint and the cold draft sneaking in under the door, this place feels oddly human. You're surrounded by others all doing the same thing, chasing a fragile illusion of cleanliness in a city soaked through with dirt. You remember the flush toilet upstairs, the sewer men below, and now the bathhouse in between. And the more you think about it, the more Victorian hygiene starts to feel like a layer cake of illusions, each level cleaner than the last but none truly clean. You scrub harder, and the water ripples brown. You towel yourself off with a linen cloth that smells vaguely of mildew. It's rough on the skin, stiff from overwashing and under-drying, but it does the job. You redress quickly in the stall, careful not to let your feet touch the wet floor. Outside, a queue is formed. Your time is up. As you leave, you pass a separate door with a brass plaque. Women's Washhouse. The rules in there are even stricter. Women were watched more closely, timed more precisely, and judged more harshly. Modesty wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Attendants might peek through cracks to ensure no one lingered too long, or heaven forbid, bathed improperly. You peek in as someone exits. Rows of women scrub linen on ribbed boards, their fingers raw and red. This isn't a bath for pleasure, it's labour, the kind that left permanent damage. Victorian laundresses often suffered from split knuckles, chronic joint pain, and what one doctor called washerwoman's hand, a mix of chilblains, burns and skin loss from lye soaps and near boiling water. One woman catches your eye as she lifts a heavy flannel petticoat out of the tub. Her arms strain. The cloth slaps the wood with a sodden thud. She wrings it out, steam curling around her, and starts on the next. No one speaks. It's all work. You step away, back into the street. The bathhouse behind you exhales a puff of warmth as the door swings shut, and once again you are in the cold. As you walk, you realise how deeply the bathhouse and the rare moments of washing shaped how people lived and moved in their own bodies. There were strategies. Men might schedule their week around it. Women planned laundry days and hair washing days, with headscarves worn for days after to hide the oily in-between. And those too poor to bathe at all, they found clever ways to mask their scent. That's when you remember something peculiar. The flea papers. Sold cheaply in poorer districts, these little packets were worn in clothes or sewn into pockets. They were soaked in vinegar and herbs, meant to ward off fleas and dampen odour. One newspaper advertised them with the promise, "You'll smell less like where you've been, and more like who you want to be." Of course, not all remedies were so gentle. Ammonia, coal tar soap, alum, borax. Many of the cleansing agents used by the poor were caustic, even dangerous. One washerwoman reportedly lost her nails to years of using lye mixed with brick dust, a trick passed down through desperate generations. It got out the stains, they said, and maybe took a little skin with it. And yet cleanliness was power. For a woman trying to get hired as a maid or a nanny, being able to show up freshly scrubbed might mean the difference between a warm bed and another night in the workhouse. For a man trying to find a job at the docks, the smell of decay might push him to the back of the line. So even when soap was scarce and water tepid, the will to appear clean remained fierce. You glance once more over your shoulder, seeing the plume of steam escape a rooftop vent. Behind that wall, someone else lowers themselves into the bath you just left. The cycle continues. Half an hour of warmth for 1 coin, a small mercy in a city where most relief was temporary. And though your skin still prickles from the scrub and your clothes cling damply, you feel the smallest glow of gratitude for hot water, for silence, and for a place, however cracked and grimy, where for once the dirt doesn't win. You duck through a crooked alley, your boots skimming over cobbles slick with ash and slop. The sky above is choked with chimney smoke as usual, but your nose catches something sharper this time. something acrid, medicinal, almost artificial. Rounding the corner, you stop in front of a small apothecary, wedged between a pawnbroker and a meat pie stall. Its window is packed with amber jars, faded labels, and cracked glass bottles with hand-lettered promises. Elixir of lavender, gentleman's hair restorer, anti-sweat solution for the discerning lady. Inside, an oil lamp flickers behind a dust-veiled curtain. You push open the door. A little bell chimes, and the scent intensifies. Vinegar, soap flakes, menthol, and coal tar. This is where Victorians came for their body problems, especially the ones no one wanted to admit. Behind the counter stands a man in a long coat, sleeves slightly stained, eyes watchful. He doesn't ask what you need. He just says, "For the smell or for the skin?" You blink. He clarifies, "The yellow stuff's for the feet, the red stuff's for the hair, the charcoal's for the pits." Welcome to the world of Victorian personal grooming, equal parts desperation, danger, and invention. You step toward the shelf where the red stuff glows in thick glass. It's a mixture of carbolic acid and castor oil, sold to treat dandruff, lice, and nervous scalp conditions. The label reads, "Apply with vigour. Do not ingest. May cause tingling." You shudder. Victorian deodorants weren't gentle. One popular formula for underarm sweat included alum, crushed sage, and formaldehyde. Yes, the same chemical used to preserve corpses. People dabbed it into their armpits daily to smell less like, well, people. There's a story the apothecary might not tell you. A lady of Mayfair, elegant and composed, collapsed at a ball after applying a homemade drying powder to her underarms. It contained arsenic dust, and the combination of heat, sweat, and skin absorption turned her perfume into poison. She survived, but never again lifted her arms in public. Even hair care wasn't safe. To achieve that sleek, middle-parted look, Victorian men used tonics thickened with lead acetate. It darkened the hair, and sometimes poisoned the scalp. But vanity always found a way. You glance at the cabinet marked "Lady's Complexion." Rows of little pots promise porcelain skin. One in particular catches your eye, a tiny jar with a pearl-coloured lid and looping script. Dr. Rose's Complexion Enamel. This one was a cult favourite among stage actresses and desperate debutantes. You open it gently. The cream inside is thick, white, and slightly gritty. It contains white lead and vinegar, meant to plaster over blemishes and create a flawless matte finish. The catch? It didn't breathe. Women who wore it too long often developed boils, scars, or in some cases chemical burns. Still, the look it gave, smooth, pale, and luminous, was worth the risk. Or so they thought. The apothecary notices your hesitation. "That one sells well," he says. "Real elegant types buy it, but I wouldn't sleep in it if I were you." You nod slowly and step back. Behind you, a mother buys something from a brown paper packet marked "Infant's Breath Powder." You don't ask what's in it. Everything in here is a double-edged sword, promising beauty, disguising decay, and all but humming with danger. And yet, everyone came, rich or poor, desperate or vain, stinking or spotless. The apothecary didn't judge. He sold what people asked for, and if it worked, even for a little while, it was enough. You step outside into the London chill once more, the bell chiming behind you, the scent of carbolic lingering in your scarf. The world looks a little dirtier now, but also somehow a little braver. The next time you spot a well-dressed gentleman striding down a foggy Victorian street, hat tipped just right, waistcoat snug, and cheeks smooth as porcelain, you might think he has it all together. But follow him home, not literally of course, but in your mind, follow that image behind closed doors. Because what's hiding behind that scent of rosewater and the fresh collar might surprise you. In his bedroom, there's likely a razor strop hanging by the dresser, stained from years of sharpening the same steel blade. His shaving soap contains turpentine, his aftershave a splash of witch hazel and spirits of camphor. It bites. That sting wasn't just a cliché, it was a chemical truth. And if he's upper class, he may even have a servant apply cold cream to his feet at night to soften corns caused by ill-fitting boots. Remember, even the poshest footwear rarely fit properly, and bunions were a common inheritance. Now let's talk about teeth. If you're imagining a neat jar of minty paste and a soft bristled brush, stop. Most Victorians clean their teeth with a rag or a stick. If they could afford it, they might dip a cloth into a mixture of crushed charcoal, baking soda and powdered brick. The most daring added hydrochloric acid, believing it would dissolve plaque, and it did, along with the enamel. One lady's maid whispered to her sister in a letter that her employer's breath was sweet as the grave, owing to a tooth powder made with ground clove and quicklime. It left her teeth white. But chalk-white teeth came with a price: fragility. A hard bite into a sugar-crusted bun might lead to a snapped molar. So the lady adapted. She stopped biting and started sipping her way through meals. This dance between hygiene and harm wasn't confined to the rich. Working-class men scrubbed themselves raw with yellow soap slabs made of beef tallow and lye, then combed their hair with bone-handled lice scrapers. Women used sheep fat pomade to slick back curls, only to wake with pillows matted in grease. And yet, amid the danger and discomfort, there were moments of real pride. A laundress would buff her nails with chamois leather before church. A chimney sweep might borrow a friend's vinegar water to rinse his scalp. Cleanliness wasn't just about survival, it was about dignity. That's perhaps the greatest irony of all. The Victorian obsession with bodily perfection, flawless skin, fresh scent, tidy hair, was born in an era when almost every product they used to achieve it carried a hidden threat. And they knew. They whispered stories about the girl whose face turned grey after years of lead-based face cream. They gossiped about the actor whose hair fell out in clumps, yet they kept using them, because to smell foul was to be seen as lazy, to have spots was to be unclean, and to show signs of decay was to court social death. One eccentric trend from the 1870s: perfumed pills, small sugar-coated spheres scented with violet or rose oil, meant to be swallowed so that one's perspiration might resemble a garden. The tablets, of course, were pure nonsense, but the idea lingered. So the next time you dab on deodorant or run a brush through your hair, remember this: you're part of a long, strange legacy, where beauty has always balanced on the edge of discomfort, and cleanliness has always cost more than it seems. A cost measured not just in pennies, but in skin cells, sleepless nights, and the faint whiff of coal tar. You're walking now, far from the city centre. The gas lights are thinning, the smell of soot gives way to peat, and the buildings begin to change. Brick gives way to timber, stone turns to wood. You're in the countryside. Well, the outskirts of Victorian London. But here, where the roads are rutted and the fog is thicker, the privy still reigns. You pause beside a cottage nestled in a hedgerow. No pipes, no drains, no plumbing. Just a wooden shack out back with a crescent moon carved into the door. Your final stop on this long, strange journey through the Victorian bathroom. It's early morning, and inside that privy, a father is lighting a lantern. His hands are rough with labour, but careful as he checks the trapdoor beneath the seat. He isn't afraid of rats, though they're always there, lurking, but of overflow, because it's his job to dig the trench when the pit gets too full. This is rural sanitation stripped to its bones: a hole, a box, and a prayer. And here's the twist. Many believed this setup was healthier than the fancy flushing toilets of the city. Why? Because at least here, nothing backed up into your home. In the cities, faulty valves and blocked drains meant that wealthy drawing rooms occasionally filled with the stench of human waste. Here in the country, the filth stayed outside, where it belonged. But there were other tricks too. You noticed the father sprinkling something down into the hole. Not lime, which would have been expensive, but wood ash and dried lavender heads, scavenged from the hearth and garden. It didn't kill bacteria, but it masked the smell well enough. The children, yawning and barefoot, wait their turn. The youngest clutches a rag. They haven't got toilet paper, but they've got cut-up newspaper, old catalogue pages, and sometimes dried corn cobs. Yes, really. They were saved after harvest and stored near the hearth to stay dry. If you're wincing, That's fair. Back inside, the mother is heating water. Not for bathing, it's not bath day, but for the weekly laundry boil, which doubles as the family's washing opportunity. A quick wipe down with flannel cloths, maybe a tin bath set by the fire if someone's especially grimy. But soap is rationed, and the hot water comes at the cost of coal and time. And yet, this little family holds on to a kind of pride. Their privy is clean, their linens are sun-bleached. The outhouse doesn't smell worse than it must, and their children go to school brushed and scrubbed. It's easy to forget that for much of Victorian England this was normal. Indoor plumbing was the exception. A flushing toilet. That was something you saw in a railway hotel, or perhaps the governor's house, if you were lucky enough to visit. Even by the 1890s, entire rural counties still relied on privies, chamber pots, and night soil men, and those countryside habits would linger long into the 20th century. There are British villages, after all, that didn't get main sewers until the 1960s. So when you think of the Victorian bathroom, don't just picture marble and porcelain. Picture this: a shivering child on a frosty morning, hurrying down a garden path, clutching a newspaper page and holding her breath. A father with a shovel, a mother pouring ashes, a life not glamorous, but clean enough to keep going. And somewhere inside, on the mantel, a little bunch of dried herbs tied with twine, not for show, not for prayer, but for the toilet seat. You step back from the cottage and let the wind carry the scent of peat and wood smoke. One last moment before the door creaks shut behind you. Before you return to your own time, there's one last place to peek inside, a boarding house in the heart of London, where 12 tenants share a single water closet. You climb the narrow stairs, creaking beneath your feet, past peeling wallpaper and the unmistakable scent of damp fabric and coal dust. At the end of the corridor, behind a flimsy wooden door, lies what the residents call the bathroom. That's generous. It's a cramped cubby with a rusted pull-chain toilet, only one among many in the building to function half properly, and a chipped enamel basin. Above the basin, the mirror is fogged and cracked, warping every reflection. A small bar of yellow soap sits in a dish, soggy from shared hands. There's no running hot water, of course. You'd have to trek downstairs to the scullery and boil a kettle for that. So most simply splash their faces with cold, flannel off the hook, and call it done. The man who enters next, Mr. Allen, a retired railway clerk, brings a tin canister with him. Inside it, a mixture of borax, powdered alum, and a hint of peppermint oil. It's his own concoction. He uses it to brush his teeth, wash his scalp, and even sprinkle down the toilet bowl to fight the miasma. A sort of DIY disinfectant invented out of necessity. He isn't alone in his inventiveness. One floor below, a seamstress boils vinegar with lavender stalks to create her own fumigator, pouring it into a saucer to purify the air. Another tenant hangs a string of garlic and onion skins near the bathroom door. Not for vampires, for the smell. The water closet becomes a kind of social hub. Complaints about the flush not catching, rumours about who took too long in the morning, and jokes about the phantom soaker, a mystery tenant who never wiped the basin. These small annoyances weren't just hygiene issues. They shaped relationships. Alliances formed over who refilled the soap. Feuds began over damp towels left crumpled on the hook. And yet, even here, there was adaptation. One elderly widow stored her chamber pot beneath her bed, lined with pine shavings from the butcher. She'd discreetly empty it in the garden at dawn. She never used the water closet at all, said she didn't trust a chain more than her own two hands. That sentiment, suspicion of the modern, lingered everywhere. Because even as toilets advanced and city maps filled with sewer lines, people knew better than to trust new systems without question. After all, hadn't those fancy underground pipes once pumped raw sewage into the Thames? And hadn't that killed thousands? And so many clung to their privies, their ashpans, their herbal sachets and vinegar rinses. Not because they loved the smell, but because it was theirs, familiar, understood. As night falls, you tiptoe back down those stairs. The hallway darkens, the gaslights flicker, and behind you, someone flushes that unreliable toilet. You hear the groan of the pipe, the delayed whoosh, and then nothing. Just the creak of floorboards and the whisper of coal smoke through the flue. The Victorian bathroom, in all its contradictions, finally settles into stillness. It was never just about toilets and tubs. It was about class, about survival, about dignity in the face of disease and judgment. It was about doing what you could with what little you had. And somehow, through all the stink and steam and scouring powders, people found ways to feel clean. And now, as your journey ends, you return to your own bathroom with fresh eyes. The hot water, the soft towels, the luxury of privacy, and the simple joy of flushing without fear. You made it. Through the outhouses and privies, the cracked porcelain and vinegar rinses, the scalding lye and cold flannels. Through the hush of midnight chamber pots and the rattle of chain-pull toilets echoing through shared hallways. Now, let it all go. Let the clatter of hoofbeats fade from your ears, the scent of coal smoke drift from your mind, and the candlelit silhouettes of wash basins and wooden tubs dissolve into darkness. You're not in a tenement anymore, not waiting your turn in the freezing hallway, not scrubbing your fingernails with ash or pouring boiling water into a copper tub. You're warm, clean, still. If the thought of all those past discomforts lingers, that's all right. Let them settle like mist outside your window. You've wandered deep into a world where hygiene was a daily gamble, where people endured with quiet grace, and where survival meant scraping dignity from soap crumbs and dry newspaper. Now, every sound in your room begins to hush. The air moves slower, your limbs feel heavier, your breath, a quiet rhythm like water in an old basin finally settling still. And maybe, just maybe, when you close your eyes you'll hear the soft creak of a privy door swinging in the night wind, or feel the hush of a basin filled with warm water on a cold morning. But for now, there's nothing to do. No buckets to empty, no pipes to fix, no soot on your sleeves, only sleep.